I welcome everyone for our January 12th, 2021 board meeting of the School Board Directors of the Bellevue School District. And we will start with roll call. I'm Francine Wiest.
Carolyn Watson.
Christine Chu.
Erica Malie.
Seema Sarafan.
And Ivan Duran.
Well, thank you. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm pleased to introduce one of our students, Beta Gasesa, who will be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then can you please lead us in the land acknowledgement as well?
Absolutely. We acknowledge, honor, and respect that our board community of Bellevue School District students, families, educators, and staff live and learn on the traditional indigenous lands of the Coast Salish peoples. We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to do so since time immemorial.
Thank you. I'd also like to note a couple of other acknowledgements for this month. So one is that it is actually National School Board Recognition Month. And also on January 18th, we will be closed in honor of Martin Luther King Day Jr. And I believe that there are various recognition events that are going on around the district. Next up, we have approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? All right, seeing none, we will approve the agenda as is, which brings us to the student update. So again, Beta is joining us. He is a senior at Bellevue High School. He's on the ASB there, and he's been involved in numerous clubs over time, such as chess and rocketry, Soup for Simpsons, and he's completed an internship and a research project, and he's started a club about that, and he's going to talk a little bit about that potentially and his experience with in-person learning and just share some thoughts in general. So we really appreciate taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you very much. I was just looking around, and then if I hover over each one of you, I see director, executive, superintendent. So I was just admiring that where I am right now, I guess. But thank you very much. My name is Beta. I'm a senior at Bellevue High School. I've been invited here today to just speak about my thoughts, my perspectives on remote learning, and I hope that what I have to say may be useful to you and what you guys do in some way. So I love school. I love education. My favorite subjects are math and physics. I love working with people and collaborating and all that. So, before I begin, I would just like to, say thank you, first of all, to the teachers and the, administration peoples who made it possible to still have an adapted version of the education we had. And so for working with the students' best interest at heart, I thank you and applaud you on behalf of all students. I have 3 points here today that I would just like to briefly mention. I think they're helpful to what you guys might be doing. Firstly, my high school, Bellevue High School, was closed since last March, and since then, I haven't stepped into campus since that time, and so it's been a while. But something I keep thinking about over and over again is the primary determining factor of students returning back to school seems to me the number of cases. When talking to athletic directors, it seems like even the small pods often get discouraged from doing regular activity because of a rise in cases, and there's a specific rate number that you can't surpass. And so it just seems to me that sensitivity to the number of cases as a discouraging factor to enter school may be, I don't want to say wrong, but in a way too discouraging. And so, just looking back at students and the activities that they do, whether students are on campus or off campus, or whether school is closed or not, I would anticipate and assume that the fluctuation of COVID cases goes up and down, even with students of high schools and not just general Washingtonian population. So my fear is, with that same hypersensitivity, that the fall of the coming next school year will probably be the same as this one. And so I just wanted to briefly mention that. And often when making plans, whether it's clubs or even ASB or leadership, that fear is always there. Perhaps since we haven't seen change with our eyes and the fear of cases is always there, we probably shouldn't plan to something. And that's slightly discouraging when it comes to the things that we do. My second point is that the closing of schools is probably more harmful to high schools themselves rather than students. Academically, students can adapt to be, completely virtual, but we can adjust, teachers can adjust, we can use online resources better. However, I don't know, as a person who, just plans out different activities, different events for students, it's extremely difficult to maintain the same energy of school tradition when our hands are tied with and limited by digital resources only. And so adequate learning may survive COVID, but traditions may not. I don't know where school spirit and the tradition of that ranks among priority at the moment, but if you were to take a freshman who spent the first year of high school online, and for whatever reason, or in an extreme case, spent the same year, the following year online as well, what you may have is a rising junior who doesn't know homecoming, winter ball, TOLO, or even a high school assembly. So I think the definition of what is high school becomes more and more blurred as you have time that you're not in high school. And so besides that, I have one last thing, and that is regarding seniors. I have to represent and ask, to remedy the absence of not being at school and in-person graduation similar to the class of 2019, I think would be a fantastic way to finish the year. Although safety, logistics, and everything would have to be adapted, I feel like seniors are more interested in finishing with a bang rather than having maybe a week or two, maybe even a month of going back to regular school. I think there's a term they call senioritis, which illustrates seniors simply tap out at the later half of their high school experiences. And so graduation for me, I know was a very big part of what high school was. And so having that for the senior and maybe junior classes almost as a guarantee, even though the presence of academic learning at school campus might not be there, I think would be a very good compromise with students, and I feel like they would be satisfied with that as well. Other than that, that's all I have today. I hope I didn't take too much of your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beta. We are delighted that we're able to have students join us, and part of that in this virtual format, which we are required to have through the Open Public Meetings Act that is currently in effect in Washington State. We're required to have virtual meetings. We're not actually allowed to meet in person. And so we're delighted that you can join us virtually and share your thoughts. And we will be continuing to get updates from members of the Student Advisory Council that the superintendent has now put together. So thank you again. We're going to be moving on to the consent agenda. Do we have any comments or items to remove from the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
I'll second it. Is there any opposition to?
I just thought of one thing, and it's not an argument or anything. It's just that we should especially acknowledge the woman who gave $10,000 in books to the district. I don't have the thing pulled up here to be able to see her name, but I would like to just, if someone could call out her name, that would be great.
Elizabeth Kane. Donated $10,000 for the purchase of multicultural books in honor of Doris Cosley.
I just really want to say thank you to her.
Right, and we are grateful to all of our donors. That one is listed here, but I know that many people are donating directly, for example, to our family connection centers, as well as to community organizations that support our students directly. So all of these are very much appreciated and help make Bellevue School District one that really can support students. All right, so are there any anyone against approving the consent agenda? Anyone against approving the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, we are approving the consent agenda. That brings us next to the superintendent update. Dr. Duran.
Great. Good afternoon, board directors and community. I'll have a few updates for you, and I'll try to keep it light. But first of all, just want to start by extending our gratitude to the school board members in recognition of January this month being School Board Recognition Month, and just really want to thank you for your dedication to the service of our students. And just know that we are sharing more information across our posts on BSD homepage and some of our social media, as well as sharing more information with our families and BSD news and events. But just really want to thank you for your service to our community, for all you do to support our students and our staff. And as a reminder, the state of our district is this week, so we'll be having 2 sessions. One for staff and educators is tomorrow, Wednesday, from 4 to 4:45, and one for families and community this Thursday, January 14th, from 6:30 until 7:15. So I'm looking forward to sharing, kind of where we are right now as a district, and more importantly, where we're going to be going, not only this year, but into the future. And then you also, I think that many of our families of young children and many, students across our district, you really missed out on some of the pivotal moments that our student speaker was just sharing, data around seeing, students off to their first day of school. I think especially at the younger grades, it's more, profound, because of our remote start. But to celebrate this momentous time, knowing that we are, moving forward with our reopening plans on January 21st for our second graders, we'll be having a K-2 first day photos campaign, hashtag BSD first day. So we're asking K-2 families to please send their photos in to other learning photos into our district site. So we'll be having more information on our website on that. And then I also just want to take a moment just to thank board directors Dr. Chu and Director Serafin for serving on the Government Legislative Committee and for advocating as a district as a whole to our governor to move up the vaccine process, moving from the B4 to phase 1 B2. Right now, the way that is set up, our educators are split so that educators over 50 are in the phase 1 B2 and educators under 50 are in B4. And so we definitely want to have more of that moved up. And so we sent a letter off to Governor's Office and OSPI Reichtel, Superintendent Reichtel, so they can just continue to advocate, and that is joining in advocation across the state for other districts that are also seeking this type of change. And that is all I have right now. Director Reese, thank you.
Thank you. All right, are there any questions? Okay. All right, so that brings us to construction related change orders. Who will be leading that section?
This is Jack McLeod. Good afternoon. I'll be requesting item number 4.1, which is the Puesta del Sol award of construction contract. And we are pleased. We opened bids. We had 9 responsive bidders, and the low bid went to Spee West Construction, which has done a number of projects, most recently Highland Middle School for the district. And of the 9 bidders submitting bids, there was an 8% differential between high and low. So very tight bids. And again, the low bid was nearly 10 million under the estimate. So kind of proves what's going on out there in the economy right now around construction related items. So we are very pleased to be able to recommend Spee West be awarded the contract for construction of Puesta del Sol. And we have also attached the bid display that shows the various bids and the low bid. And so we are recommending award of Puesta del Sol project to Spee West Construction in the amount of $48,335,000.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, seeing no questions. Oh, we do have a question, Dr. Chu.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to check if the COVID circumstances are going to change the timeline for that project, and if the changing also once the bid is in, if the economy is in a different situation, is it possible that there will be overruns on the estimate based on cost to the contractor?
No, the answer to that is no. It's a hard bid number, and that is the cost of factoring all the various things that are out there around COVID. So there's a fairly strict program that's required of contractors to have in place for COVID practices as far as keeping the workers healthy and being able to ensure that the project moves ahead. And so those have been addressed and dealt with. And SPE West at the Highland project, of course, had starting last March, they had to implement those types of things, and they took care of things very well. We had no lost time as a result of any COVID issues from March until when the project was completed in August.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? So I have one, and it's just to confirm, especially now during the time of COVID, and there's been a lot of focus on ventilation. Are there any changes or with that in terms of the design and construction of our buildings?
No, we have implemented all of the best management practices that have come out within COVID, as far as making sure that we have adequate hand washing stations throughout the building, the restroom facilities, everything like that, with adequate space and accommodations that way. So yeah, we've really looked at things that have come up and what are things that we could have done differently in the buildings to accommodate that, and made those changes where we were able to. We found that in most cases, the design was pretty tight as far as making sure that we had plenty of hand washing access for students and staff, and toilet room facilities and the like.
Okay, and then with specifically with regards to ventilation, I know I see it's subcontracted out, but were there any changes that needed to be made, or are we at the excellent level for building health in terms of ventilation?
Yeah, we are using systems. This will be the most updated HVAC system that we have used in the district. So every project we do, we try to improve upon the previous one, and any lessons that were learned, we try to employ them on that next project. So we feel that Quest to be in the last elementary, it has the best systems of anything that we have used to this point. So we are very confident in that.
And the timeline for construction, for start and completion, just to review.
We are giving pending award of contract tonight. We will provide a notice to proceed to the contractor for them to start mobilizing on the site tomorrow. And the completion date is right now is August 19th, the final completion, August 19th, 2022.
Dr. Chu.
Just a clarification, if there are students back in the buildings this year at Cuesta, was this already anticipated that there would be work being done on site? I just want to be clear and make sure that I and the community are clear on what the plan is for housing those students during the 2021 school year, should they be in session. Yes,
for the 21-22 school year, they would be in they would be in their current site at Cuesta del Sol down in the old Sunset Elementary site. They would be there up through August of 2022.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that, since you made the comment that they would be able to start like the day after this contract is approved. That won't change the work they do on
No,
site.
that's not going to change it. And part of the reason is that just when we were able to go ahead and get this thing permitted and all the various hoops we had to jump through to get the project permitted through the hearing examiner, conditional use permit. This has given us a little bit earlier start, but we still need to have the 2 summers to get the work done when the weather is better to do some of the site work and things like that we have to take care of on this project.
Dr. Chu, would you feel like it would be clearer than to have the motion, which has not yet been made, but under the recommended action, that it's not really replacing the current Puesta del Sol building. It's actually replacing the current
Bellwood.
Yes, Bellwood building.
Site, not the current Puesta del Sol site. So they're not going to be interacting.
Yeah, we're not knocking down the current building that they're in right now. This will be a brand new school on a different site for Puesta del Sol.
So we can entertain a motion, and if someone wants to make a motion that clarifies that, otherwise the motion or the recommended action would be sufficient.
I move that we approve the contract award as noted in item 4.1.
Second.
All right, I'm going to return to the affirmative since I can see everyone, and then I'll announce that. All those in favor signify by nodding yes or thumbs up. That's great. All right, so we have everyone is in agreement. So Mr. McLeod, the contract for the Puesta del Sol replacement project to be awarded to SB West Construction in the amount of $48,335,000 is approved.
Thank you very much. The next item is the approval of the tenant improvement project final acceptance for the ESC project that was done, and there is a resolution for that. Basically, it's our standard resolution that I have gone through and been involved in that project all the way through, and the architect has advised us that the project has been completed per the design and the specifications, and recommends acceptance of that tenant improvement project at the ESC East building.
Are there any questions? All right, seeing no questions, can I have a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
And I'll second it. All those in favor of adopting resolution 2021-01 signify by nodding or raising your hands. And we need one more.
There she goes.
So it's approved, it's unanimous approval for resolution number 2021-01. So thank you very much, Mr. McLeod, for leading us through these and the work that you're doing on all of these projects. All right, that brings us to item number 5, policy review. We are doing the first reading on procedure 0130P, equity and accountability. Who from the C's committee would like to take us through this? All right, Dr. Chu.
Okay, is it going to be projected for us, or do we want to do this? Because we're going to jump into a couple different documents.
Yes, we can have it projected larger, or does everyone have it pulled up?
Well, I think if people are going to follow the meeting with us, we just need to be projected somehow. So the document that I want to make sure we see is the revised 0130P markup. So we can look at that, and then the first document we'll end up jumping to is Exhibit A, and I'll probably just put the clean copy unless everyone wants to look at the markup copy.
I just wanted to let Dr. Chu know that I'm having trouble hearing you, and I don't know if that's just on my side.
Sorry, I will try. Is that any better? All right,
a little better,
I will
but
try to speak more loudly. I'm on. I usually work with my own personal setup, and I'm using just the district laptop tonight, so I don't have the same microphone and speakers that I'm used to. So I'll just work that out. thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, and just to repeat feedback we've had from the community, I think anytime any of us speak, if we can just announce ourselves or the person before us, hand off so they know who's speaking, since we see each other, but they don't see us.
We are trying to call on each person. Okay, so it sounds like we will use the clean copy then, unless anyone wants to project the marked up copy. Is that what you said? You did cut off at that point.
I was saying that we should use the clean copy of the Exhibit A, but I don't know. I was thinking about using the markup copy. It's a clean copy. It's fine. We can use any. Carolyn and I'm hoping Carolyn will just jump in and bring things to folks' attention here.
Right.
Basically, the way this is done is that it's a refresh of the tables that were in the procedure from last year. So because it's a refresh, I'm not sure that there's a huge advantage to having a markup copy. So a clean copy is probably just fine. Carolyn, does that work for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up for myself because I did have some comments on it. Yeah.
Okay, is there anything you want to lead us through, either of you, on that? My comments are more under the, are we going to be discussing, even though it says just P, are we only discussing the procedure and not the policy at all today?
That's correct.
Yeah.
As you recall, we're going to do multiple rounds of revision on 0130 and 0130P this year. And our focus right now is for the immediate need to take care of the following 3 items. 1, to put the draft critical criteria updated practice in place to respond to the comments and feedback from staff and board members over the last year of trying to use the tools that we've had. 2nd, to update the board's commitments for this school year. So we're a little late in articulating those. And 3rd, to update the district's commitments to equity for this school year. And those should be and are tied tightly to our annual plan and our COVID work. So hopefully you'll see that we are just calling out the aspects of those that are really designed to be responsive to our commitments to equity. So that's what we want to present and get feedback on. We've met multiple times as a committee, and this is a first reading, so we want to get the input from those who haven't had the chance to be in those committee meetings on what that looks like. So yeah, we have not actually as a committee seen the final version that we have here, but it was drawn up based on our last committee meeting. So hopefully we're going through exactly what we expect. So with that in mind, I think we want to start with the critical criteria. Carolyn, is there anything you want to add to frame this conversation?
I think we'll get to it when we start looking at the exhibit and the template.
Okay.
That's the things I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So well, I'll hand it over to you, Director Watson, to kind of give some framing when we get to that point. So right now we're starting. If we look at the procedure, you can see that we have retained in the critical criteria section the important questions that we want everyone to consider when planning any program, any policy, initiative, budget, curriculum. We want these questions to be top of mind. But we also found that the way these questions are organized individually wasn't really working as a tool to get folks to really dig deeply and answer questions. They were finding it repetitious, and it was turning this exercise into more of a checkbox than a real investigation. And it also didn't account for 2 things that we know are really important. One is community engagement. How are the stakeholders being engaged in this work so that people are not evaluating the critical criteria for our stakeholders in our community, but with them? And the second thing that it didn't take into account was how do we follow up and make sure that those things that we said, not only those things we said should happen, but those things we said we better make sure don't happen are actually happening or not happening. So that's what the work that Melanie's team, Ms. McGee's team in the district office really tried to drive forward across staff to account for. So if it's all right with you folks, I'd like to switch over to the critical criteria exhibit A so that you can see the revised table. So I'll wait till that gets called up. And then Carolyn, did you want to frame this a little bit further at all?
Well, I think the thing is, when I want to tell everybody, when I walked out of the last committee meeting, I was really excited about this work and what we had accomplished. And I'm concerned about the critical criteria becoming a habit, because we have had them and been talking about them for, it feels like a year or two, right? And still to this day, we forget to use them. Certain things come around, different things where you would, maybe expect, and we don't have them. So what excited me about this is that if we have this table, and it's all about practicality and getting it in use and getting practice using it, we have this little table that we could paste on the bottom of just about anything we do, whether it's a policy or, project proposal or just anything, a curriculum change. And we go through all these things. I think that's really exciting and could get us into the habit of just thinking this way. In a way, the table is something that I hope that through enough practice, we'll start to naturally think about these things every single time we do something. So I wanted to express my excitement about that. And also, I do think, though, when we go back to the drawing, not to the drawing board, but to the revising a little bit for the second reading, I do want to change just a few little spacings and things on the format so that it truly can be something that, even if that you can get on the bottom of a page, so that it's not even a separate page, so that you're sure to look at it.
All right, any comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond that I thought this was nicely done in the sense of its practical and value use for all the reasons that I think Dr. Chu and Director Watson have just outlined. I think I would say we have always thought of, at least I know I have, and I know others have, of how do we ensure we're bringing the critical criteria, but the ability to use it in a kind of, I would say, a nimble way is really valuable. And just to see it all up without having to go back and forth across pages, I found myself always highlighting it, and this year essentially you've taken the key elements and you've put it all in one place. So I would just say nicely done, and I think this will be very practical.
Okay, Dr. Malif.
So I'll just chime in and say that I think that we do want it to become a habit. We want it to be used regularly. This looks like it will facilitate that. I would say that as much as I'd like to be able to, your idea of putting it on the bottom of the page, I do feel like there's not enough room to write it. So I think that it's going to be an electronic document, right? So that under students, for example, being able to really do, justice to determining how different groups of students are impacted would need a lot more room, and being able to list different groups out. I think which was what we were doing, but then it just became very repetitive throughout. So being able to see it in a chart where that then goes across each of these areas is a much better format. But I do want to make sure that it would be nice if it was built in, that it showed that there was a lot more space to write it, or there's an expectation that, because it's not just going to be one group of students necessarily. It's going to be, there's different groups of students. There's a lot of intersectionality. So there's, that's my.
I am hoping we'll do lists, we'll do bullets, we'll do keywords, and we won't fill it with lots of dense prose. I want, things to stand out to people. Same ideas, but just kind of getting them in there. But yeah, people are free to use it as, as they want, and they can put lots and lots of, they can make it go to 2 pages if they want.
In answer to your questions, Dr. Weiss, the I think that what Director Watson was saying is that we can tighten up the formatting here and the ways that the questions are presented in a way that really invites the content, the answers, the responses to be more the body of this work. And I think you're absolutely right that there are many different groups who are impacted by our initiatives, and it is critical that we're acknowledging and calling it out and watching and doing. So hopefully this will enable us to do it. We will try, and if for some reason this doesn't give us the improvement we want, or we see another better way, then we'll just propose that. But I think this will be a big step forward. Are there any other comments that folks want to give us on feedback as we iterate for second reading? Okay, so then I think that takes us back to the document. Director Watson, is it okay if we go back to the other document?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so we'll go back to the clean version of procedure 0130P and just show you what we filled in, trying to use the work that the board committees and the board itself had already identified as its priorities, and the work that we as a full district team have committed to through our annual plan process and that work. So we tried to focus on that and call those out. So in the policy, there are a list of commitments that the board has committed to doing to advance and improve equity in our district. So each of those commitments, you can see the first one here on the page, A, provides system-wide direction, support, oversight, and shared accountability to advance equity and eliminate inequities in our Bellevue School District community. And last year, we went through the exercise of identifying what are some of the long-term outcomes about what that looks like. But then each year, we want to know, how are we making progress? What are the success measures? How will we know in 2020, 2021 that we made progress on this commitment? What are some of the strategies we're using? And then later we'll fill out what the outcomes were, and we'll go through the exercise of deciding if we got there and what we need to do. So for this one, we've really focused on the critical criteria as our measure of success for really making that usable, making sure that it's we're regularly engaging stakeholders with it, etc. So you can see that here. I'm not going to read each of these to you, but I think we can pause on each page and ask the directors if you have feedback or questions, keeping in mind that only the columns 3 and 4 have been updated here. So on commitment A, before we go to the next page, are there any comments or questions about the measures of success or strategies?
So I do have one comment. It is not in either of those columns, but I just want to call out under long-term outcomes that we do still have achievement gap there, but I believe we're moving more towards the opportunity gap. So to consider where that is in the document, whether we want to change that. And certainly it came up in the reading in preparation for today's study session, where opportunity gap is really talking more about the structural, the systemic inequities that are built in, and less on the achievement gap and the focus on the individual and kind of the blame that sometimes is associated with that. So again, it's not in one of those other columns, but just to bring that up.
Thank you. Okay, any others on A? Because I'm going to keep us moving. That's a great thing worthy of calling out. I just want to keep us moving. Anything else? All right, so let's move down to the next section. B and C, I think, are on the next page. We'll just pause and take any comments. Oh, I guess we're going to go page by page. So I'm going to go. Have folks had a chance to review this document? We've had it posted since December. So are there comments? Are there within the board commitments? Are there any that folks would like to talk about rather than going one by one by one?
My only thing is when we do the final one, just to try to take out the abbreviations. So under C, it says, AF, ACT, ADVA, so
sorry. Yes.
Spell those out again. Just it's easy to overlook.
Thank you so much. Are there any others on the board commitments? Director Watson, is there anything that you wanted to call to people's attention in the board commitments before we go to the district commitment? Okay, Executive Director Harrison, I think, spearheaded the work across the district to get those commitments updated. I don't know if the superintendent or Executive Director Harrison want to chime in, but effectively the district has updated its long-term outcomes, its measures of success for 2020-2021 school year, and the strategies for this year. So again, same thing. And the effort was to really ensure that this work is aligned with and represented in our annual plan. That was the major work. Dr. Duran, do you have anything you want to add as we wait for some comments on this section?
No, I think that's pretty much what you said there, is that it just was really aligning with our work that we're doing through the annual plan. So we've really tried to bring that in so that it's not repetitive or additional, but really in support of what we're trying to accomplish this year.
Yeah, equity really has to be something that isn't an optional thing. It's always central to the work that we do. So, Dr. Watson, anything else on this one as we take comments? Okay, other directors, do you have any places in the district commitments that you want to call out that something is misrepresented, or missing, or anything that, or do you still have a question? I will say that the committee hasn't had a full chance to review all of the district pieces because I think those came in a little bit later. So we will make sure that we do a second look through the board and district commitments and clean up the things that Dr. Weiss referred to as well. Anything on the district part of this that you want to call out that you're worried about? I do want to just bring to everyone's attention that this is a broad set of important commitments. So this is everything from curriculum to professional development across the district to really like focusing that kids have access.
I'm really having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm
sorry.
so sorry. Thank you for bringing that up again. Okay. Anyway, I just want to call out that this is a broad set of commitments that we've made on this equity work. And it extends from everything from curriculum to access to training, professional development, and the district has work to do in each of these spaces that it's committed to. So it's an impressive commitment. Anything that folks want to call out? Director Watson, is there anything you want to ask for feedback or comment before we end this review?
You might have noticed I was gone for a second. My internet just went out, but I'm back. No, I think I'm good, but I missed the last couple of minutes.
No major comments.
Yeah.
And Executive Director Harrison, is there anything that we missed from the committee?
Thank you, Director Chu. Not at all. I think this was a really good summary. Just one thing I just wanted to explain in the procedure. There's a section towards the end that's highlighted, and the reason why that's highlighted is C's felt like, you know, the reporting kind of process, we give ourselves a little bit more time before we revise that section of the procedure. So it's highlighted in yellow.
Yeah, the plan for that is that the board committee will go ahead and that will be led by Executive Director Harrison in the spring here. All right, so that's what we've got. Thank you everybody for the review and the comments. If you have anything else, let us know by the end of the meeting and we'll bring back for second reading as soon as we're able. Thank you. And thanks to staff for all the work, to Ms. McGee and Director Harrison and Superintendent Brand for the work on this.
Thank you. And then just to clarify for the next reading, because there were so many changes in the marked up copy, what should we expect? Will they be any comments made to the current clean copy will be highlighted, or will they be highlighted in a marked up version?
My preference in this particular situation, normally I would do a marked up version, but I think in this particular situation, because we're just redoing that, refreshing the commitments, it will be better for us to mark up the clean version.
All right, is that all right with everyone? There was quite a lot to, it was challenging to read the marked up version. Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, so that moves us to 5.2, second reading, updates to policy 3207, harassment, intimidation, and bullying. Who from the SIFE committee would like to take us through the second reading? Dr. Malif.
I will. This is Director Erica Malif. So this is second reading for this policy. If there are further questions, I do believe that Ms. Nancy Pham, who is our compliance officer for HR and PIB, is on if we do have further questions. But most of the, I don't know if we want to bring up the item in the marked up version, or if you all have it open and can see it yourselves. We have highlighted the changes, of which there are 2 compared with the first reading. Really the only concern was in the lists that list out what meets the definition for harassment, intimidation, and bullying as far as this policy. In bullet C, and this is repeated a couple of times, is so severe, persistent, or pervasive that it creates an intimidating or threatening educational environment, is what it said before. And we took issue with the word educational because that could eliminate a lot of things, and so we just removed it. We had a lot of discussion about, what that sort of meant, and really came to the conclusion that it didn't matter, and it just was just referring to the student's the environment in which a student finds themselves, whether that be online or in a school building or on a sports field, or even after school, because those all pertain to our students. So that is really Director Chu, I don't know if you had any other comments. This discussion of this policy was your first meeting of the site committee, so I don't think that it was that you have much. Does anyone have any other questions or concerns?
So I'll just raise, this is Dr. Wiest, raising that we do have educational environment elsewhere within the policy, but then it would not be under C. So it starts off with the first sentence says that, and I know currently there are cases proceeding through the court system regarding when and where. So I completely agree with all of the sentiments expressed that it's not just the classroom, for example, it's kind of within our whole sphere. But I just do want to note that we take it out in one place, but it is elsewhere.
Let's see what you're saying.
Clarify that, because I wonder if we can do that as an administrative update after the fact if necessary.
It's literally the very first sentence. The board is committed to a safe and civil educational environment for all students, employees, parents, legal guardians, volunteers, etc. And that's absolutely right. I don't have any, in the spirit of the full discussion that the committee had, which circled around this exact phrasing, I don't have any problem taking out the word educational in that scenario either. And I would be happy to accept that as an administrative change because it really fits with the changes we were making in the rest of the policy.
We could just include in the motion to approve this. We could embed that change. We could actually do that.
Okay.
Yeah. I have one thought here.
Director Watson, go ahead.
Yeah, when we're talking about other distinguishing characteristics, so we have the list of things that people might be harassed, intimidated, or bullied because of that are written in law. And then we say, and other distinguishing characteristics, and then we come down and say what those can be. But do we have any notion of including, I don't know, the quiet kid, the kid who speaks differently, the kid who comes across as very intellectual, those kinds of differences? I'm just wondering because I've just heard of kids getting, they get picked out and picked on because they are the quiet one, the intellectual one, the one who doesn't fit in that kind of way. Do any of these words cover that?
Well, there's There's a sentence right above that. Nothing in this section requires the affected student to actually possess a characteristic that is the basis for the harassment and bullying.
Yeah.
So to me, that covers that.
And also the other distinguishing characteristics, like I think there's enough.
Just like the way they carry themselves or interact. I just don't know. I don't have a word to throw right in there, but you know, being a bit introverted, being a bit studious, being I'm thinking of the, you know, people I've seen picked out for bullying.
Mm-hmm. So I believe Ms. Pham is on here. I just want to get some comment clarification from her because in the first paragraph, this references the RCWs and regarding the regarding Director Watson's comment, as I recall, this policy is specifically referencing those RCWs, and we do have the misconduct policy, which sort of covers all other bases, I believe. Executive Director Harrison, did you have something to add?
Just is Nancy, is Ms. Pham available? I want to give her the opportunity first.
Yes, I am. Thank you. So when I checked in with Felipe about this change, he actually did not recommend the removal of the word educational because that's language specifically taken from the statute, and removing it would make the definition broader than the statute intended. I do also want to point out that there is more of an expanded explanation of that line in the procedure, which says conduct that is substantially interfering with the student's education will be determined by considering a targeted student's grades, attendance, demeanor, interaction with peers, participation in activities, and other indicators.
Oh.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay.
The other thing I would just add to Director Watson's point is, and Director Malif has already kind of pointed it out, is that the language says any of the characteristics in RCW citations, including but not limited to one shown to be motivated by race, color, and religion.
I know. I just thought, you know,
I understand the concern, and the intent of the legislation and the policy is that any form of harassment directed at any type of student, no matter what they bring, whatever their unique beauty that they bring to school every day, that they should be free from harassment, intimidation, and bullying.
Director Wiest?
So I'm looking at the RCW, and when I pointed out about the environment, I wasn't necessarily advocating for removing the term educational because I want to make sure that our purview is appropriate, but I agree that it's not necessarily just the classroom. So in this, it looks like it says discrimination in Washington public schools, and so you know how that's defined. So not just school buildings, but I think our school campuses, and extending, for example, when there are you know, field trips, that includes kind of the purview of that environment. So we could match that, then it does match the statute, or I think the term educational was probably used because it then didn't seem so building based, especially in these times. But campuses or school related activities.
But, you know, that's accurate, and that, you know, and generally speaking, the educational environment is kind of defined as any kind of school-based activity, whether it's on campus or off campus. So educational is not intended to be limited to the schoolhouse. But I think when you read that, one could see that as limiting, but it's intended to be broadly based.
So I'm going to actually make a proposal then on the wording change that we could do. I also think that there's some carryover in language here from a past era that I'd like to drop out at this time if we're going to fix this. The board is committed, I would propose we say that the board is committed to a safe environment for all students, employees, parents, legal guardians, volunteers, and community members at our schools and school events, that is free from harassment, intimidation, or bullying. Or at our buildings and school events.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit because, you know, this policy applies to student interactions over like Fortnite, and you know, other online interactions that are not directly related to schools and school buildings and school events. And so I don't want to, you know, it's our school community really. And so I don't want to limit ourselves too much in it. It's like it's treading a very fine line between being too broad and too limiting.
Well, then why don't we go back to the initial suggestion of just removing the word educational? It's an environment for all our students, employees, etc. So we don't, as you're saying, Erica, this applies to the full community that they exist in. And so we can leave that and let the rest of the law set the confines of that more precisely than we need to, because our concern is that community and that environment that we're establishing.
Aren't we allowed to be broader than the law?
I don't know, but I think I'm proposing that our wording be broader than the law, that we just
I think we're
committed to a safe.
This is Director Serafin. Can we get Felipe's input on that?
So again, this is Felipe. Thank you for that. I would say that, you know, if you want input from our department, I think we do that offline with respect to this, because it requires interpretation of the statute and legal advice, which I'm happy to give and happy to meet with anyone that we need to. The context in which our department reviewed this was through you know, the compliance officer, and so we had a very limited role and very limited scope in the work that we were doing. And of course, from a legal standpoint, I'm always more risk adverse, and so in that context, over time, what I've seen through experience that works the best is following our WASDA model policies and not trying to get too far in terms of deviations from those model policies, because over time those change as well as, you know, roles and responsibilities. And so, you know, I think if folks want to expand, I think then we need to do a critical analysis from a legal standpoint on this. But I think if you're comfortable with where you've been and what you've done to this point, you know, if Nancy and John and that crew are satisfied with that work, our department can support that. But if there's additional changes that you think you want to do, then I think it takes another step back, and I need to take a critical look at that.
Well, I think what I would propose is that
Director Chu, can you speak directly into your computer? I'm sorry, it's just.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm like leaning over into the mic, I think. So my proposal is that we get input from the board members as to whether or not there are any other comments or changes that they would like to see made. And if not, that we go ahead and table this and reintroduce it with the first sentence amended based on legal counsel, and return it to the consent agenda of the next board meeting, that we can have it ready for, whether it's the next January 1 or the first one in Feb.
This is Director Watson. I'm wondering, and I'm not sure about this word, but you know how I was worried about the other distinguishing characteristics definition? Could we do something like can include but are not limited to physical appearance, behavioral differences, something like that? Clothing and other apparel, to cover my introverted, shy kid who gets picked on.
Okay.
Or is that not the right word? It might not be the right word.
I don't have a problem with that, but include physical appearance, clothing, yeah, that's fine with me.
I think there are
can't hear you.
There are behaviors that if someone exhibits them, they themselves can be harmful. And I think if you want to, these are substantive changes by adding these words that seem they seem innocuous, but they have other potential implications. So if we're gonna have to bring this back and do a legal review, we could do that and take that comment and bring it back, and then we could use our judgment as to whether or not to put it on the consent agenda. And if we put it on the consent agenda, you guys can always ask to pull it off and have a more substantive discussion.
I just think it may, I realize we're at a second reading, but in light of the, I think sorry, this is Director Serafan, in light of the, I think very thoughtful suggestions that Carolyn's raising, as well as, or Director Watson's raising, as well as the input that our general counsel is giving us, it just feels worthwhile to take it just maybe to the next meeting. And then you could get the benefit of that. And I realize consent agenda would be faster, but maybe we can just adhere to a 5-minute review.
And if anyone could think of a word that would cover what I'm trying to say better than behavioral difference, but
I hear you. I just feel like we can't do this in real time.
Yeah.
Director Malif, do you think we can take these pieces of feedback, the one about making sure that we're not implying that it's only in a scholastic environment, that educational isn't mistaken to mean scholastic, and that we want to cover discrimination of all types, even against a person based on potentially their behaviors as opposed to based on their physical characteristics, that we'll just take those back as action?
Yes, I think we can do that. Ms. Pham, is there any problem with delaying this for a month? Is there any requirement we have to meet here? I don't think so.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, just checking into that. Then I accept. Did you make a motion for that, Director Chu? Do we need?
No, I think we just table it because we're basically going to.
Or we're just not. We're not moving to approve it at this time, and we'll take a look at the agenda, and you can circle back with me in terms of the timing. So if you meet before the next meeting, we can take a look and see if we can get it on. I think it is important. I think we're in agreement, largely in agreement as to the intention, and we want to make sure that this is available and clear. There are some updates I think that are really important for our community and to support our students. And so I would prefer that we did pass it soon, but in terms of getting it right, and there are things currently in the that affect this, that we should make sure we have the wording correct.
Okay. All right, we will listen and bring it back. We are quite over time, so.
We are over time, so we will thank you very much for that, and we'll see it again soon. We are number 6, committee updates. I don't believe there are any committee updates. I know some of the committees did present in December. Is there anything else that needs to be mentioned?
You have a couple from BOCOM. I think
How about, should I take a crack at it just because I think my audio might be a little better? Okay, so let me start by, this is Director Serafan. Let me just try to give I'm going to go for a 45-second update. I think Dr. Duran already alluded to it. Dr. Chu took the heavy oar and drafted a very powerful letter to Superintendent Reichdahl, as well as the governor's chief of staff, I think will also be included. And essentially, we're advocating to ensure that the vaccine rollout is one where teachers are frankly all brought into the what is, I think, B2, a phase that puts all teachers together. And then if a prioritization needs to be made, we've offered a proposal how that could go. But the real point is we are asking for this to be prioritized and done with a lot of urgency as well as clarity back. Additionally, we are working with other districts to advocate for our legislative reps to ensure that the money that comes through the CARES Act is distributed in a manner that is appropriate, that it comes out to the districts as quickly as possible so that we can use it with our discretion, and so that, frankly, we don't get with the left hand what is taken away from the right hand. Meaning, if money is passed through the state that ultimately comes from the federal government through the CARES Act, it doesn't end up meaning for our district or any other that we instead are shortchanged money that we were supposed to get anyway from our state legislature. So these are for the benefit of other board members, as well as those who are listening. These are things that we do through our committee. In this case, it's through our Governance and Oversight Legislative Outreach Committee. It's what we are doing, what we call the Goal Committee. It's what we are doing additionally, and it's part of also the cadence we have of meeting, frankly, with our legislative representatives, which we do once a month, if not more. But this is an additional sort of thing we do to ensure that we are representing the interest of our school district as strongly as possible. So that's the update we've got, and we can give more maybe at our next meeting.
Let me add just a couple items on really quick on the advocacy piece. In addition to asking for the prioritization of our educators for the vaccine, there are 3 other things that were in there that I think, well, 4 other things really that are important. One is communication.
I didn't mention testing, sorry, yeah.
Really better communications about the data in our state and the understanding situation. The other is that the vaccine rollout is accessible to teachers. Like, how do they sign up? Where do they get it? Every school can't be a distributor of this. I know that Issaquah has signed up to be a distributor of the vaccine. That is a non-trivial thing to do, and all schools were not able to do that. So we need to know that our staff will have equitable access and clear access to the vaccine. The other things that we advocated for were rapid turnaround on testing. We absolutely need very easy access. If we have a potential case in our schools, we need easy access to know if there's whether or not there's really a case, and so we can isolate it immediately. And Director Watson, you will be pleased to know that we're also advocating for some level of support for surveillance level testing, so that we can increase not only the confidence of our community, but that we can contain any potential spread as quickly as possible by proactively doing testing. So we reached out and really pushed hard for those things, and we'll continue to do that to advocate for our educators, our students, and our families, our community. So yeah, thank you, Director Sarfin, for setting that up.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other committee updates? All right, so thank you for that. Looking at the time, and I know we approved the agenda as is, but I would like to keep us to being able to do public comment at 6 o'clock. Although we have the study session next, I wanted to check with the board and Dr. Duran if we could swap and do our COVID adjusted updates now. That way we could have a break, and I'd like to make sure that everyone saw that there's been an announcement from the district regarding grading, and that way directors would have time to read that prior to us going into the study session. So Dr. Duran and board directors, would it be okay if we did our COVID adjusted updates now, take us to our break, have a chance to read it, do public comments, and then do that? So we're going to shave kind of 5 minutes off of each of these.
Dr. Wiest is Dr. My concern is that we have members of the grading advisory team that have been with us for this, who have joined us and kind of been waiting for us. So if we do this, we will be pulling them off the end.
It will curtail the amount of time though that we will have for the grading. Can we check in with those people? If you could put in the chat, would you be able to stay with us to do this at 6:10 start time? Or you cannot do it?
Zach and Susan.
I would be okay having a shorter discussion, but I don't know how this is Director Sarfan. I would be okay abbreviating the discussion as needed to the 45 minutes, I guess. Is that right? But I don't know what other board directors think.
Okay, so it looks like I'm not sure how many members of the grading advisory team are here. but it looks like several can accommodate the shift in schedule. And I think that would then again allow us to everyone to read the announcement and have that in. So let's go ahead then with the COVID adjusted updates. So swap the two. I'm seeing assent. I don't see any dissent among directors.
Thank you to the students.
I'd be happy to reverse the order, but
Okay.
I do also have slight concerns that if members of the public are joining in to hear specific things, they tend to look at our agenda and join at certain times.
Yeah.
If we swap, that would be problematic.
All right, well, that will curtail our discussion then, or we may take the break off for public comment. Directors, are you all right with that?
I'm perfectly fine taking the break after public comment.
Okay, then we'll keep the agenda as is. Thank you for everyone for considering the flexibility. It makes this section a little bit shorter, although maybe we will go till 6:05 or something. I think, Mr. Harrison, I'm going to turn it over to you. And as we're switching over, directors, please make sure that you've seen the announcement that was released around 4 o'clock.
Go ahead, Dr. Wiest.
Yes.
All right. Dr. Duran, did you want to say anything first?
No, go ahead. I think for a second time. Let's jump in.
All righty. Well, good evening. John Harrison, Interim Chief of Staff. And I'm going to start with a quote from State Superintendent Rakedahl from last June, in which he wrote, "The pandemic is a call to action for our education system to reassess our grading practices. Now is the time for school leaders and educators to make grades meaningfully aligned to fewer specific standards, combined with feedback that gives students multiple opportunities to demonstrate learning and put homework and extra credit in its proper place. Now is the time to decouple behavior and compliance activities from assessing student learning." Powerful statement. I'm thinking there's 3 purposes for tonight's study session. The first is to, as you've had a brief discussion already about, to inform you that revisions to grading for the 2020-21 school year were announced earlier this afternoon. And in summary, the changes are as follows: the elimination of F grades at the secondary level. For high school courses, all Fs will be replaced by NC, which means no credit, and the benefit to students would be that the NC does not impact the GPA. At the middle level, for non-credit courses, Fs will be replaced with NE, which means not sufficient evidence. And then for high school credit courses, students may opt for a P to replace any passing grade. And similar to the NC, the benefit to students would be that there would be no impact on the GPA. At the elementary level, educators will have the option of not scoring a standard and indicating NE instead. And there were no required changes to the current BSD grading scales that are in existence. Second purpose for the session this evening is to update you on the grading advisory team's progress. And then finally, and most importantly, an opportunity for you to engage in a conversation about grading using your discussion protocol. And to frame the conversation tonight, the focus question is, what does high quality, equitable grading that reflects student learning look like? And as mentioned a few minutes ago, I do have invited 5 guests. 2 of them are members of the grading advisory team, and that would be Zach Daniels and Suzanne Reeve. In addition, I've invited Tony Granito, who is the ITCL at the Big Picture School, and 2 teachers, practitioners, both at Big Picture School. One of them is Brooke Weber, who's a middle school social studies LA teacher, and then Andrea Del Moral, who is a high school Spanish teacher. I should mention that Zach, his role in the district is an instructional mentor, and Suzanne is an ITCL at both Sammamish and Odell. Prior to this evening's meeting, I did provide some resources for you. There are 3 PDF files. The first is district resources, which includes our district's best practices in assessment, grading, and reporting document, which is codified as an exhibit under Procedure 2420. And I also included the document that was produced by the summer grading team titled Assessment and Grading Plan Proposal. The second category is grading and assessment resources, which includes 5 articles intended to provide some background and understanding for the discussion tonight. And then finally, the additional resources has 6 articles just intended for you to delve a little deeper at your convenience. So kind of to put this into context, last summer there were 2 initiatives that occurred simultaneously that laid the foundation for the work on grading this year. The first was a large, organic, grassroots, educator-initiated book study on Joe Feldman's Grading for Equity. The second initiative was a team of educators that was convened to recommend grading practices for reopening schools consistent with OSPI requirements. The team presented a comprehensive proposal referenced above, and it's in the brief that I provided, and it was with the BSD BEA team that negotiated the August MOU. It included recommendations from this document for the implementation of 4 best practices in grading this year. The MOU also called for a team to be formed to support the implementation of a shift to a more equitable grading system for the district. And the brief describes the process and selection and lists the team membership. I'm an advisor to that team, and I'm the point person for this important body of work. So what is the role of the grading advisory team? The role is very simply, well, I shouldn't say simply, it's complex and nuanced. The role of the team is to work with educators, students, and families to develop recommendations for a district-wide grading plan by May of this year. The team will gather input from relevant stakeholders, collect data on assessment and grading, and review research on best practices to build a shared understanding of what a better system will look like. The team is using the interest-based strategies approach to conduct its work, and the brief describes the IBS process. What's most important at this point, however, is what's the status of the work, what's coming next. The team recently completed the interests phase and is beginning the options phase. At this phase in the process, team members will be divided into groups to develop options. This is a very important phase because members at this stage will collect and analyze data, review research on best practices, and this is also the stage at which members will be gathering stakeholder feedback through a variety of means. So, given this update, what does high quality, equitable grading that reflects student learning look like? And I'll turn it over to President Wiest.
So thank you. So we do have our discussion protocol. We do basically have two items. One is the kind of short term for this semester and potentially for the rest of the year issues. If there are clarifying questions, we'll take that more so than a large discussion, and then move to a discussion for the kind of longer term. What does, what as many of the readings said, the purpose of assessments, what that does for our students, how they support them in their learning, keeping in mind we're also doing the strategic plan refresh, and in terms of what creators of our future world, what does that mean? What does that look like? How are students supported in that through assessments, feedback, grades? There are different indicators throughout their journey with us in the educational system. So right now we'll take clarifying questions on the short term or comments there, and then we'll go to the longer term. Does anyone want to start? Director Watson.
Yes, I have a question based on the email that just came round. And it's just that hopefully this is just easy clarification, but yesterday I think we talked about it, and we talked about, I think you've got it like the teachers can use discretion in that email. but there was a chart that showed like another option that's not on the email that came around, where we sort of showed for like in the short term, it says individual educators may vary from the scale given the circumstances of the school year. But in the original version, I saw there was a suggestion of how they might do that. And that was when an A could start at 85 and so forth down the line. So it seems like they can still do it, but they haven't been shown necessarily the option. Is there, and so what is the reason for removing that?
Yeah, I'm gonna, Deputy Collins, if you're available, the Deputy Collins help facilitate, get those messages out. So I just want to make sure that she's got the most recent information so she can answer that question.
Yeah,
thank you, Eva.
What happened was there are two versions, one that went to all staff and one that went to parents, and the parents was a pared down version. So if you, I think you would have this in your email, the staff version. Let me just double check. I think has that.
I didn't see it yet.
You saw. Let me just see. Yeah, I think that's what you're referencing. If you,
I'm looking at one that went to community relations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the family one.
That's a family one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not necessarily seeing the other one. And
I think can you check your email?
Yeah, you forwarded it. Yeah, I got it now. But the thing is, I think some of the oh, wow. Okay. So there must be a rationale for that, because I think some families were concerned about this, that, you know, their A student is now a B student.
Yeah, what the intent is there were no required changes to the grading scale, but there's certainly that option for teachers to choose to alter the scale, and that second table that you're referring to and Eva was referring to is an option for educators. And to be fair, there are many educators that we've heard over the course of the last few weeks that have already started doing that.
So I have I guess a question. I would like to just test what I'm taking away from this. Mr. Harrison and Ms. Collins, and just make sure that I've got this right. I know that when I looked at, I think, some survey information that came through the PTSA, which I found very valuable, I saw a range of feedback from students and parents, and it ranged from students saying, I don't want to see, these are my words, I don't want to see my hard work dialed down to almost meaningless because you water down an A, or you require teachers to make an A 80 to 100 or something else. I saw also students expressing a lot, as well as parents, a high degree of just stress about what it does to a student to have to do more, as they are doing now, trying to essentially help teach themselves in ways they hadn't had to before because of the pandemic. And then also have this extra burden of being worried about their GPA or implications for the future. And then I also appreciate that also teachers feel that they know kind of what's right for their class and their and what the right thing to do is, and they don't want it to be mandated from the top down. So what I see in this, and I just want to make sure if I'm getting this right, what I see is you're essentially saying, hey, look, to the example of what Carolyn brought up, if you have a student who, let's say actually used to be an A student, but now they're bordering on a C in a particular class, they have the option to say, I want that grade to externally be presented as a P, and it's my prerogative to make that call out class by class. If I do that, then my GPA will not have the equivalent of a C imputed into the GPA. But then what I also hear you saying, which is I think where you started with Reichdahl, is that teachers are being strongly encouraged by the district to utilize, I think, a sense of a different approach right now, or more grace, realizing that students are doing more than just the regular academics, and that, but then the chart that Director Watson's referring to is essentially giving an option that is kind of like, I'm hearing you say, heavily recommended teachers, that you consider a grading scale that is revised, where, for example, an A is 85 to 100, but you're not requiring it. And I think what I'd like to hear is just what is in the, we'll call it the advice bucket for teachers to consider when and how they should apply that recommended, what I will call grace or revision, because of the time we're in. Can you like maybe focus on that, and also just tell me if what I've said so far is even aligns with what you were hoping to do?
Yes, I think the answer to your question is simply yes. You know, and in terms of, you know, when that's appropriate, Dr. Patty Seaworth held a session. We had a CERT administrator nuts and bolts meeting this afternoon, and for the most part, the conversation today was focused on this particular topic, and specifically this decision. And Dr. Seaworth, you know, created an opportunity for building leaders to have conversations about how they might support their staff in implementing not only the 4 practices that we put into play this year to be more equitable, but how to implement, and this is nuanced work, and every kid is in a different situation, but how to set up teachers and counselors with that kind of oversight and support for students, particularly our seniors, to ensure that their decisions are informed, meaning the students and families, and for teachers to be flexible, to accept the reality of the situation that we're in, to do our best and to do no harm for our students.
I'm afraid I'm going to step out of the protocol, so I'll wait, like if we want to get back on the protocol, but I have something apropos. Can't hear Francine.
Well, I'm thinking go ahead.
Francine, are you there? Yeah. No, it's just, I'm wondering how there's a lot of latitude in what we've suggested to the teachers. And then in our belief statements in the assessment and grading plan PDF, it talks about how grades should be consistent for students within a course across the secondary level or across any given grade level. So I'm wondering, how are these two things going to fit together? This, like a lot of latitude, you might choose to do the 90, you might choose to do the 85, you might choose something else, and then coming together with this belief statement about consistency.
Yeah.
Because one of our readings was talking about how the grade you get can sometimes just be the luck of the draw that the computer assigned you to teacher A instead of teacher B.
Yeah, and that consistency and variability of student experience is like a major motivator for this long-term work that we're doing. So that, you know, was a belief statement that the summer group kind of had about grading in general. And so that point right there about that consistency piece, I mean, that's why we've engaged in this long-term work that we're doing. And I've described this, you know, it's in some ways unfortunate that we've chosen this year to begin this work. But in other ways, it's fortunate because the pandemic has really shone a light on the inequities that were always there, but have been kind of exacerbated, you know, since. So there's this short-term challenge of this school year, particularly this semester, and then the long-term work that we need to address. And that consistency piece, again, is a major motivator for that long-term work, where the decision shared today was to address, you know, and mitigate the impact of this environment on grades currently.
I'd like to hear from Dr. Chu, but I do have a question just about how, given the optionality of this, how we're going to ensure that this is, like, what do we have to, which is, I think, Director Watson's question, like, how are we going to make sure that now you don't have, for the exact same class, one student whose teacher decides to apply the, this revised scale, and one teacher who doesn't, or even a teacher who maybe applies it inconsistently across their same class. I mean, what is the appeal process? But I think Dr. Chu's had her hand up. So.
Dr. Weiss, how would you?
Yeah, it feels like what we're doing here is that Ellen kind of presented her piece and now we're kind of commenting on it, which is great. Do we want staff to answer, or do you want me to make comments? I'm happy to go in either direction, Dr. Weiss.
Well, I think that I'm having some technical difficulties, but seem to be back. Why don't we address Director Serafin's points that are there about inconsistency, because they reflect, I think, what Director Watson brought up as well, and then we can move on to another time. So it looks like most of our time is going to be occupied with the short term, hopefully bringing in some of the themes. It sounds like not everyone was able to open the PDFs. I think the way they were compressed, it's difficult to upload them. It did take multiple times. So we may need to revisit some of the longer term themes at another meeting. But why don't we talk about the inconsistencies that might happen, that may be exacerbated compared to normal. We all recognize that they happen currently, and that's part of the idea of revising. I think along with that, perhaps addressing the differences in communication that the educators have received versus the parents, because in the family's communication, there isn't anything about latitude. And in neither of them is there anything about the standards-based grading and what that scale is. So
yeah, it's just a couple things. Is that the standards-based scales are still available. I believe there are 3 different standards-based scales available in Synergy. We've got the teachers here who could probably answer that question better than myself, since they're the ones that actually use them and do and assign grades. But that the inconsistency kind of piece, one of the, I think, as we move this forward, our building leaders, our counselors, I mean, taking that kind of team approach to support our students and taking a look at and assessing our grade data to ensure that, if there's a kid that would benefit from this, hasn't taken the option, I think there's work to do. And, I really encourage our building leaders today and gave them the clear message. We need your leadership in this process as we move through the remainder of the school year. So I see Eva's smiling face. So Eva, would you add to that? And again, we've got some teachers here. So I know Brooke has weighed in to say that she's got something to add. Sorry, Dr. Duran.
No, I was just going to say that it looked like Brooke and Zach both have something to add on to this.
Yeah.
Why don't we let them go first?
Thank you, Eva.
Hi, thanks. I work at Big Picture. I teach language arts and social studies. And we do standards-based grading and try our best, of course, to focus on the standards. So like you guys said, that grades are consistent. They're focused on what students know and understand and are able to do with those targets and goals, and are not trying to take out the bias of it. But no matter what, we have to think of students holistically, because we live in a holistic world. So even if you take you separate standards-based grading, I've worked at other standards-based grading school, you always need to show, of course, like growth and take the student into account. And so for me at this time, having, as a BA rep too, having many long conversations with teachers who were initially very upset about the possibility of some, obviously, so there's, I never want to say all, but we're upset about the possibility of changing the grading scale. I had to remind them right now is, like you guys are saying, we are not going to have consistency. We have to think on an individual basis. We have to think about how much harm is done to students, and how differently each student is living in this world of the pandemic. So we cannot take right now, I believe, as what of of grading students in the same way we would in a regular environment. And we know that even that environment is inequitable, so we can learn from that. But to me right now, I think that it really needs to be reiterated to teachers too and communicated, because I don't feel like there's been a lot of conversations, because I've had to like have these hard conversations with like the fact that, you know, I have teachers across the district, not necessarily my school, who have 50 kids in a classroom, or they have class, you know, overages. And how is a teacher able to actually help those students and teach those students at the ability that they would in a regular grading situation? They're not in the classroom, right? So therefore, who are we actually penalizing? The only people that are getting penalized are the students, because we have power over them. So if you're a teacher and you have 38 kids in your classroom, or despite the circumstances, that kid has 3 siblings in the same room as them, no matter what, the only people that are being penalized are the students. So I think that like even just thinking of the F and the D, it's something that you really have to take into account as a teacher, that that needs to be reiterated, that these are circumstances where you don't have the same power to help each individual student and give that same time. And that student also does not have that ability. So we are not in the same kind of, like, we need to think about it as a holistic thing, give grace, give flexibility, and think about the power that we hold over those students. You know, people have debates about inflated grades and all sorts of stuff, but the reality is that grades are supposed to be, the purpose of grades is just to reflect what students know. And right now, their ability to possibly know traditional teaching, learning targets and goals is not the same. And therefore, I don't feel like necessarily it should be the same. And I think that those conversations really need to happen. So like what you guys are saying, teacher A is not giving all their students Ds, but they're not having the ability to do like one-on-one time with them, or they have a huge caseload, so they're just overworked or whatever is happening in their lives. And then also recognizing the individual lives of those students and the circumstances that they're having to deal with. So just kind of my input right now.
Okay, is there a follow-up to that for a particular question? Okay, and then did Mr. Daniels want to chime in as well, and then we can go on to Dr. Chu's questions?
Yeah, thank you for the time. I want to add on to Brooke and echo what John is saying about the consistency piece being really a long-term change and evolution of our grading practices. And we're fighting for consistency right now in things like students being graded on evidence of skills versus effort and compliance, being able to have multiple ways to be assessed, taking assessments a second time to have a second chance to show new learning. So that's the consistency we're striving for right now. I would recommend that we look at any inconsistencies that come out of all the options that we receive today for grading. And I'm in the classroom teaching as well as mentoring first and second year teachers. I see them more as opportunities to be equitable instead of inconsistencies, opportunities to tailor what we are offering our students based on what the needs they have, giving them what they need when they need it. And to add on to Brooke, we have teachers that are teaching 4 and 5 preps over 2 different schools in their first and second years of teaching. And they need to be able to do the right thing for their kids, and they need to be able to offer up options for their students as well.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you. Dr. Chu, did you want to go with your comments?
Stay and ask. I didn't know if Dr. Collins was going to speak before, but if we're ready, I'll shout here into my microphone. Let me know. Do you want Eva to talk, or do you want me to?
I think we want to take comments on this, and I think we're going to be mostly on this, depending on how much more everyone has. But it does feed in, I think, into the larger discussion about equitable grading practices. So how we rise to a challenge in the most challenging times, and how we are trying to create a system that works better for students, that teachers are able to implement with fidelity, but at the same time feel like they have the professionalism, grace, and latitude to serve their students in the best possible way. These are all the themes that we're tackling now, which will also hold us instead long term if we can do it right.
So I'm ready to talk about those things. I just didn't know if you wanted Eva to say anything before I chimed in.
Go ahead.
Great. All right. So what I want to bring up are a couple of things, and I'm going to ask first, can you hear me? Because I'm basically shouting at my machine. Okay, great. I will keep shouting. Please don't take it personally. I'm just trying to have my voice heard. So the thing that I see that I am wondering and worrying about is that we are putting a couple, like we've got three things going on here at once. First, we're looking at the right grading system, the right equitable grading system, the right motivating grading system, the accurate representation, but we're not necessarily looking at how to implement that. One thing is a great system, another thing is the process for making it work and implementing it and getting a consistent high fidelity implementation. The second thing we're talking about, where there's a sort of a miss here on the two pieces, is we're talking about compassion and understanding and acceptance of the circumstances for this year. And we're talking about a longer term system and an equitable system. And we're not drawing clear distinctions, which complicates the first issue I raised quite a bit, which is fidelity of implementation, consistent expectations from teachers, etc. So when I look at all the things we're doing, I want to say that I really deeply appreciate this push for an improved grading system. I think it will do wonders in terms of equity, accuracy, and motivation for students. And so I want to keep the focus on students, because that's the grades are supposed to serve students. They're not supposed to serve society, they serve students. So when I look at the systems we have in place, I really appreciate this long-term work to look at a standards-based system that Brooke and Zach were describing. That's great. And I think it's important that our community, our students, our teachers, our families are part of defining what that looks like here in Bellevue. So I'm looking forward to that work. For the short term, I'm excited about the idea of pressing teachers to be compassionate and giving them tools and ideas. What I see missing is that almost all the things I am listening to are cleanup. If your grade wasn't where you wanted it, we looked at the Fs. Well, maybe we don't need to just look at the Fs. Maybe we ought to be looking at whether or not a student's GPA this semester is radically different from their GPA from the previous year or the previous 2 years or the previous 3 years if they're a senior in high school, and say, like, what's the differential overall across our system? And is it normal? Because I doubt it is. And so we're talking not just about one kid or not, like one group of kids, we're talking about kids throughout our system being disengaged, demotivated, or not able to learn in the same ways, many of the issues that Ms. Weber was bringing up. So what I want to understand is, how are we incorporating things that not just clean up the system? I love the compassionate grading ideas. They're wonderful. But how are we doing things, especially as we start second semester, that start changing the motivation in the first place, the way the grading is implemented? So why haven't we yet implemented something like 50% floor instead of a 0% floor? Why haven't we implemented a no zeros? Like, those are things that the research shows create more equitable systems, do not lead to grade inflation, and are much more motivating and accurate in terms of students, so that they don't get so far behind from those 2 missed assignments from the beginning where they now have a 0, or they bombed a couple tests at the beginning and now, well, they're just checked out because there's no motivation. So I'd like to know what we're doing for second semester to make the grading systems more equitable and motivating. And I also share the concerns that have been articulated tonight around consistency of implementation for students. I think the intentions are there, the hard work is there, but the beliefs across our group differ, and we don't seem to have a clear implementation plan that prioritizes students' outcomes on this one. So I'd like to understand better what we're doing to help with that.
So why don't we at this point, so Mr. Harrison, if you can keep track of some of those things, and my understanding is that the grading committee is looking at a lot of those things. And in the time that we have, if someone has a direct comment related to what Dr. Chu said, to comment on that, but then I want to go around and get directors' overall sense on kind of where we are now and their top kind of priorities of things that they are thinking about in terms of equitable grading generally and long term, because I think Dr. Chu summarized a lot of those just now. So does someone want to piggyback right on there and then also go into their thoughts?
I was going to comment on what's happening for this year, particularly this semester. So maybe Dr. Wiest, you can tell me when you want me to express that.
We've done a bit of that. So I want to get a little bit of the long-term thing and then circle around to try to close out. Just that way the grading committee and one another have an idea of thoughts around equitable practices generally, and then close out with specifics because that's, you know, happening now.
Okay. So, I will save my comments for what's happening right now because that is for me the biggest concern.
Right. So any other thoughts on just general statements around equitable grading practices, implementation, some of the particular things like 50% floor, whether it came up in the readings that we were provided or readings that you've done previously? Dr. Watson, you're shaking your head. Would you like to chime in? You're on mute.
The 50% floor, I've been hearing a lot about it from nearby districts, and also it seems some of the colleges in the time of COVID have implemented this 50% floor idea. So I was wondering, what has been our discussion on that, and couldn't we just like do that? I don't think it would solve everything, but it might help.
Okay, so we won't do a question and answer thing right now. So let's put that there. Okay. That's brought up by two directors. Anything else? Dr. Malif, do you have any other comments on just grading generally?
Nothing that hasn't already been said.
Okay, so I'll just chime in and say one of the late additions to the board docs was a snapshot of some of the standards-based work that's being done in big picture, but I think it doesn't drill down potentially enough. So I've seen additional snapshots in the gradebook which show a project, the type of standards then that are underneath that project, and so a student can really understand where they are in terms of mastering each of the standards or each of the areas within that. So rather than just getting a C on a project, they can say, oh, I was able to master or show demonstration of mastery on these particular areas, but then on this area, I was not as strong. So this is the area that I need to work on. And so perhaps for the future, we can get something like that that can really show that because I think it's very powerful for student learning. So overall, I'm very heartened to see all the work that's been going on. It was great to participate in the book study this summer with educators and read and discuss that equitable grading practices together and really see that it's driven, and just hearing from our educators today about how there's just a passion and a will to get this done for students. I would say that fundamentally for me, if we are to make progress on the opportunity gap, we need to know what students know. Students need to know what they know. Families need to know what students know. And in order to do that, whether that then translates into grades, it's fundamentally saying that we have to have a good understanding of what that is, even from the various early stages, because it's very easy for those gaps to persist, to widen, and then to get to a point where, because there were certain fundamentals that were missing that just weren't tracked, because so much can get hidden in a in a grade, in an assessment, if it's not really intentional behind what are those skills that a student has, that then we wonder all of a sudden why in middle school they just drop off, for example, because they didn't have some of those strong skills early on. So it is tied to grading, but it is really fundamentally this mastery-based learning, really understanding what students know. And so those are, I think these other things are the okay, if it's a 50% floor, how do we do these things that are fairly, how do we make sure that all that's going on? But fundamentally it comes down to understanding what students know, but that students know that, because especially in these times like this, and this may not be the last situation where we are really counting on students to be self-driven learners, if they don't know what they are missing, it's really difficult for them to get the support they need to be self-driven learners without that feedback. Okay, and then the rest of my comments are the specific ones to now. So are there any other just general comments on the direction that the district is trying to move in to support students?
I think based on the readings that we did and what we see here in the documents on the district plan, it sounds like at a high level that we're on the right page in terms of, obviously they did a lot of research, accurate and meaningful and motivational and bias resistant and consistent. I mean, these are all the concepts that are being thrown around. I am also not entirely clear how it's all going to work on the ground, but maybe that is coming.
Well, a lot of those are the operational details, right? So as a board, like looking at the oversight and saying, so for example, until we understand what students know, it's very difficult to then implement equitable practices in terms of providing students the support they need. If we don't know what it is that they know and they don't know, then it becomes difficult to support their needs.
I was very intrigued with the formative assessment thing, but the way they talked about in some of the readings that you give this, I really believe in it, you give this frequent feedback, but you have to do it in such a way that you don't discourage the kids. And then that depends a little bit on the emotional makeup of that individual child, whether they'll find it motivating or discouraging. And but it was said somewhere in our readings that you would need to do the formative assessments within the classroom like twice a week to really have it work in terms of having the kids know what they know or know what they don't know, or there's this whole theory about using that kind of testing as part of learning, which I think really holds up. Testing as learning, where you think you know everything, and when you go through your notes, you nod and you say, yes, I know that, I know that, I know that. But then when you're actually asked to spit it out on a test, whether it's a free form answer test or whether it's multiple choice, you find you don't know. And then if you take that with the spirit of curiosity and it's not going into your grade, you can go back and say, oh, and then, oh, now I know that. And then next time you'll do better. So I think that's part of what you were talking about. How do we know what they don't know so we can fill in those gaps? And that's where those formative assessments come in.
Yes, I think having it not be these high stakes and not feeling punitive, but really being in that spirit of curiosity and learning, and perhaps applying them so it's not just a fill in the blank test, but that it's applied to a project that, so as we talk about, again, creators of their future worlds, what does that look like? Where do these different project-based learning, personalized learning, all of those other things, they fit in, but then there is still something at the end, potentially. I mean, there are other systems and other models. Anything else? So why don't we take Mr. Harrison or any of our other educators who want to take just really briefly 30 seconds response to any of those, and then we'll go one time around with the short term and close out. So that means that we're going to push into a couple of minutes and then we'll do public comment.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Weiss. And I would love to give both Suzanne and Andrea an opportunity here. They had something to say based on the conversation, but just very, very quickly, no zeros or a minimum grade floor are wonderful examples, and they were in the readings. I mean, Feldman kind of describes them as, equitable practices. And I don't necessarily think that they're inconsistent with standards-based grading, but my comment earlier about the complexity and nuance around grading, one of the key things is how we're defining terms like standards-based grading. And so that's in this work, the most important work piece, I think, is the why and the purpose, but being really clear about what do we mean when we say formative assessment? What do we mean when we say summative assessment? What do we mean by a minimum grading floor? So the short answer to Christine's question about, why can't this happen now? And I believe that, Andrea put something in the chat to this effect as well, is that nothing, but if it becomes a standard practice, that would be something that the grading advisory team would include in its, in its recommendations when we get to that point. So Andrea, and then Suzanne, and then I just want to make sure that we, they've agreed to be here tonight. So I'd be love to hear from our practitioners. So Andrea, and then Suzanne.
Great, thank you. It's really great to hear how you guys are thinking about this at the district level, because it's helping me recall conversations I've had with teachers that are not doing this yet, and also just think about what it's like on the ground. And I think when we think about the long-term piece, that there's so much work to be done, both among teachers, and these are issues we still grapple with at Big Picture, and also with students about educating each other about what grades are doing, what they're communicating, and that they're not essential value judgments about someone's inherent potential. But the reality is that grades currently do have real world impacts in terms of access to college and jobs and everything. And that is a real tension that I sit in when I'm grading students. And with standards-based grading, students, it is harder to get A's. If you're doing the system with fidelity, it's harder to get A's or to achieve what is a 3.5 out of a 4-point scale. And I think those are some of the deeper issues that we're gonna have to address in the long term here too. I faced them, and I taught my first year in the district at Newport and at Big Picture, so I was doing both systems with the same courses. And it's really evident, like it's challenging for students to understand what the system, what standards-based grading, the potential of it is to become a self-directed learner, because truly they care about their grades, and that's reasonable in the world that they live in. So that's part of our challenge, I think. It's a real paradigm shift. It's not just a logistical rollout shift.
Thank you, Andrea. Suzanne.
That was good.
Yeah, thanks for letting us be here. I know time is tight, but I appreciate that. I'll just say a couple of things. One piece is around the consistency piece that I just want to acknowledge, and I work at Odell and Sammamish. I just want to acknowledge how many teachers are putting in place a 50% floor this year, or using a 0 to 4 scale, which really, when we say 50% floor, what we really are referring to, and sometimes we use that in a broader sense, for an equal interval scale, something that's not a 0 to 100 where 60% of that is the F, right? So a 0 to 4 scale is an equal interval scale, which is not, there's no 50% floor in the 0 to 4, right? But that equal interval piece. There are many teachers and schools that have done that. Highland as a school, my understanding is that Highland as a school has implemented a 50% floor this year. So I just want to acknowledge like the amount of effort that's going on, and that's a lot what I heard from Odell and Sammamish teachers when I asked them for feedback about grading and potential changing the grading scale, and they said, we have already put blood, sweat, and tears into setting up our grading scales the way that will support our students the best they can right now. And for someone to come in 3 weeks before the end of the semester and tell me now that I have to just throw that all away and change it and tell my parents something different than I've communicated all semester felt very frustrating and disempowering and discouraging for them as teachers. And so I just want to acknowledge this, the work that teachers are doing, tremendous amount. And Carolyn, your point about, I don't know what this is going to look like on the ground. I have a PhD in education. I've been on this grading team for the summer and this one. I've worked at Big Picture. I've worked in this district for 10 years. I don't know what it's going to look like either. I think it's hard to overestimate the challenge and the complexity, like John was saying about definitions that come in here, of talking about grading, and like Andrea brought up, and the identities that are bound up in grading, the societal significance. It's hard to overestimate that challenge. And so I don't know what this is going to look like, but I think we're trying, and I appreciate that we're on the path.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you for all those comments. So why don't we go around one more time with the current situation? I'll start with Director Serafan, then Dr. Malif.
Thank you. So this is Director Serafan. I have to just say that I think anybody listening is going to get whiplash, because the shift between the longer term focus and what we're doing right now, these are very different. And I think we have to acknowledge we are creating, by accident, not intentionally, all with good intent, but we may be creating confusion as we shift between these topics. And so the concerns I just want to outline, and I'm kind of going to be looking, at least on my monitor, I'm looking at Mr. Harrison, but what I think is important to me that I would have liked to have had captured in the emails is, of course, we should be thinking of grace and compassion, but I also think we just have to reflect that the same way teachers are being, as I understand it, graded differently, or not by the 8 components, but rather the 2 of the components, if I understood this correctly, Harrison, that the criteria by which teachers are being graded is also shifted in light of the pandemic, as well it should. This is more than just what could be viewed as, let's be nice to kids. Rather, we should be acknowledging that they've had to do more than they've ever had to do before, because they're doing more self-teaching. It is not only those kids who we know, they make up a lot of our students, they have household responsibilities they never had, they have things that we don't even know about that they may not feel comfortable sharing. So there's all of that, but there's also even a student whose life may feel relatively the same, except they're now home learning. That student too, even if they are in a B-, they are they're not failing, but they are not, their grade does not express how much more they've had to learn on their own, and how much harder it may be to learn chemistry when you're not in a lab and you're in your bedroom. So I think what we need, and what's missing for me, John, is you can give teachers an optional scale. But if we fast forward, you're going to have hundreds of kids pinging their teachers saying, this isn't fair, and how did you arrive here? So what I'd like to see, I think what would be valuable is to have some principles that go around when and how should I as a teacher be guided by what makes it appropriate to go towards that scale. So for me, if I was a teacher, I'd like to just offer some ideas. Did I as the teacher give my grades as I went along as quickly as I perhaps normally would have? The answer may be no, for no fault of that teacher, but that could be a factor, because when a student sees, that they didn't do well, let's say on an assignment in September and October, and they get that response quickly, then they can learn, what do I need to learn to do better in this class? And if that assignment came back 6 weeks later rather than 2 weeks later, well then that puts that student at a disadvantage. So this is not just grace and be nice, this is actually, you are having a very different academic experience. And the other piece is that the teacher may realize, well, by one standard, this student maybe knows less than my kid did last year, but I can see that the lion's share of that learning, this student had to do more of it on their own. That is a good reason to, I think, revise that scale and to optimize towards that more, what I would call generous scale. But it's a generous scale, but it's also a scale that's simply different. Part of what we are seeking to achieve with our kids is the ability to adapt, and our kids have had to adapt. And so maybe they are not able to do calculus as well as the class before them, but maybe they learned better how to figure things out, maybe to a lower fidelity, but they've learned another skill. And so in some ways, I don't want this just looking like or feeling like a freebie. It is rather a recognition we are in a different space, and therefore our grades reflect something different. I'm simply saying that I think if we don't have some binding principles, we will put our teachers in a hard spot. And I think to Director Watson's point, we may have we will have had the opposite effect of what we were trying to go for. We may think we're giving more optionality and grace, but we may end up making students feel really discouraged about what they're getting, because they'll say, you know, my friend had a teacher who didn't opt for that 85 to 100 as an A or all the way down, but I got the teacher who decided how I do things in the past is how I'll do things this year. So what I worry about is without some of those principles, we will have given latitude, but maybe created more confusion. So I'm very rooted in what we're doing right now, because I feel like, and I want to be clear, it's not just seniors, it's 8th graders who may be doing advanced work and they go, well, this is going to impact my high school. It's 10th graders, it's 11th graders, it's a lot of our students. And I think, you know, all of us are just hearing across the line that there's just a ton of stress. And I think, and we can feel it from our teachers that they are experiencing the stress, but I want to give that optionality, but with enough principles and guidance so people feel like they're operating from the same set of rules. So sorry for that long.
No, not at all. Thank you.
Each chime in, so there. So thanks for summarizing that. Dr. Malif?
Yeah, so on the short term, just emphasizing again, for both middle and elementary school, the NE designation, if there's not enough evidence to support, you know, standards. So that's great. Completely understand why that would be necessary. However, so many of our goals for the year are based on students meeting standards and subgroups of students meeting standards. And if there is no evidence for these standards, especially at the elementary school, we're not going to have data. We're not going to have that information, and that is data by itself. So as this moves forward, I would really like to see, you know, how many NE designations are we getting in this space? Who are the students that teachers are assigning that to, or, you know, not assigning a standard to? So I'd like to see some sort of, you know, analysis of this as we go through this, so that we can keep track of the students that, for whom we don't know if they're meeting standards or not.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you.
That's it for now.
Okay. Director Watson, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'll just say that I think Seema got it. You know, I feel like I want to summarize the summary, but basically the thing is, how do we balance the reality of the fact that kids are having to do more to self-guide their learning with, and so wanting to acknowledge that with being consistent across all the different teachers, so that kids don't feel like they've been put at a disadvantage because they got a particular teacher.
Okay. And Dr. Chu, any other thoughts for the current short term?
Sorry, my unmute bar disappeared completely. I couldn't get back. There we go. So I do want to end with the stuff that we're summarizing and focusing on right now. I think there's a couple things. For me, the top of mind here is to look at what is the impact on kids. And there are 2 impacts, or maybe 3, that we're really talking about. So one is the kids who are dealing with the stress and all the angst that comes from the different learning environment, the outcomes from that, the grades themselves, everything. So when we discuss the grades, we should be talking about how to address that issue. It's not just about Fs, it's about the stress and anxiety and the differences in learning environment on our kids, and we need to address that. The second is engagement. We have differences in engagement, and grades are a motivating factor that help kids understand their sense of belonging in a system, their sense of success, their potential in that system, and the way they're viewed in that system, the power structures in it. And I'm not clear that the work that we're doing is addressing that proactively so much as it's addressing it in a cleanup way. So anything that we can do second semester to also address that piece is important. And then the third piece that Erica brought up, Director Malief, about how accurately is this giving us a picture of where a kid's at so that we can support them. What do we know? Let's make sure that we have some clarity around that. I love what Director Serafan suggested about having some consistency and guidelines for teachers, but the other thing I want to acknowledge is I hear a lot of theoretical, philosophical talk about the wonderfulness of standards-based grading. And I want everyone to keep in mind that number one, rolling out a system like that with fidelity takes time. We are in the middle of a pandemic and we can't expect to successfully roll out such a system this year across our system. We can expect some teachers to take it on or some pieces of it to be taken on, but we cannot expect to roll that out across our system. It's not right for expectation for teachers. And secondly, it doesn't allow for families, students, and teachers to give input into defining that system. So I think what the grading team is doing is great, but please let's keep that in mind as we work on the remedies. There are teachers using all sorts of grading systems out there right now. And when we give the guidelines, we have to make sure that the guidelines we give help to address issues of anxiety, differences in learning, motivation, and clarity so that the kids are actually addressed, no matter what the grading system in use is by that teacher, so that there is some level of consistent experience, consistent forgiveness, and consistent acknowledgement of the situation we're in. And I would like to keep in mind what Director Serafin so aptly pointed out is that the teachers themselves, their evaluation system has been changed this year to reflect these conditions. We need to make sure that we give that same grace and recognition and acknowledgement in how we are dealing with our kids. So those are the pieces that I think have to be taken care of. And I really appreciate the amount of attention and energy that folks are putting into this and the grading committee's commitment to equity. But please keep those pieces in mind as we talk about a realistic rollout for right now.
Okay, great. So I didn't ask for someone to take notes and summarize, so I'm going to do it really quickly and weave in my comments as well, because for the most part, they've been very well articulated already. So Mr. Harrison, I'll just say, if you could resend the PDFs as individual files, that way we can make sure that all directors are able to really access and read them, and then flesh out the snapshot of big picture. It could be another one, but that has that project based with the standards embedded, so that really clarifying what students are learning. Can
you just, Dr.
Yes.
Weiss, just repeat please repeat the second part of what you said?
It's I believe that there are some assignments in the green book where you can see that there's a project and then embedded under that, and it may have been in the snapshot you did, but you couldn't click on it to see that there are actually then standards, and then the student receives a 3, a 3.5, a 2, a 4 for each of those standards that's then rolled up into a project. And then so I think just perhaps more examples of the different practices that are going on, maybe even some annotation around that would be helpful to get a better understanding of what's going on in the district, what seems to be going well, what might be the direction we're going in. There seems to be a sentiment that there's definitely some short-term things are going on, but we don't want it to impact students today, and at the same time, we don't want it to jeopardize the long-term efforts to really get to a more equitable assessment practice and to really understand what students are learning. So we don't want to conflate the two, and we realize that emotions are high, that stress is high, that bandwidth is low, and that those could get conflated, but that do not want the short term to jeopardize the long term either. I think there was much about acknowledging that there were skills, self-directed learning that students are having now that are worthy of being acknowledged, and perhaps that factors into their grading. So at the same time, teachers have had a different experience in terms of being able to provide the education, so too kids have had in the receipt of it in what they've been expected to do. And as a district, perhaps those standards weren't articulated in terms of self-directed learning, and yet it is a standard probably in almost every single class. And so how is that reflected as educators consider that? And we definitely hear that it seems last minute because the end of second semester is upon us. However, it is something that has been going on throughout. We hear a lot about what is the impact on kids, making sure that we're really keeping in mind mental health, levels of stress, motivation, all the factors that grades can come into, and recognizing that whether or not we agree that so much of society is tied up in grades, that's currently the reality, and so how we thread that needle. Very, very short term, I think we need to clarify to families that this latitude narrative is being discussed with educators, because it did not come out in the communication that went to families, and so families aren't seeing that, and especially to the seniors, what the impact of that might be for those who are choosing post-secondary options that require submission of first semester grades, how they will be supported. I think into the letter to families and to educators, there was not a clarification about the standards-based scale. So we just heard one of our educators talk about an A being a 3.5 to a 4. There is a standard scale that is a 3.0 to a 4.0. And so perhaps clarifying that there are several scales that if mastery is considered, if a 3 is considered that standard has been met, then the standard has been met, mastery has been achieved, that is an A. And so there seem to be some differences there that I think the grading committee long-term will address, but that perhaps needs to be clarified now. Dr. Malief's point about any designations and making sure that those are tracked so that they are in terms of the analysis going forward for the district data that relies on reporting how our students are doing. We want to make sure that we're not just taking those out and then only looking at the ones that do have something there, because it's a very important piece of data when the NE designation has been given. And I guess finally, it's keeping students and their learning first now and going forward, but that's tied into, as we frequently say, their social emotional well-being, their mental health, as well as their academic experience. So rush that through. I hope I hit everything. Yes? Okay, one more, Director Watson, and then we're doing public comment.
I wanted to say something to Dr. Weiss and to Chief of Staff Harrison, which is that I really appreciated this work session. This is the kind of thing that I wanted, I've been wanting since I first got on the board. And once I got those PDFs open, I enjoyed the reading selections and being able to read something and come in and talk about something a little more in depth. So I wanted to thank you for this.
You're muted, Francine. Dr. Weiss, you're muted.
Okay, so it was a thank you to everyone. This does not need to be our only session on it. I did want to just call out again appreciation to the grading committee, everyone who's been working on that. It's been an enormous amount of time and effort to work on this, and we know that that work is ongoing. And then just to our educators in general who are living it every day, and to our students and families, that we're in this together, and this is not the last word on any of this. Okay, so we're going to move on to public comment. I will read the statement, and then we will have public comments. And need my statement. Find it. Okay, the board has accepted public comments for this meeting via an online written submissions and will share up to 3 minutes of each comment as read by the board coordinator or other designee of the board. To maximize the number of comments read, if there are more than 3 comments, the board president may shorten the number of minutes of each comment to be read. The board will listen to all comments carefully, but will generally not respond to comments spontaneously or without further deliberation. Complaints about specific personnel will not be heard in open session and will not be part of the record of any public meeting. Harassing or derogatory comments about any person or groups of persons will not be heard. I also want to iterate that our open public meetings do not require a public comment period, but board policy reflects the value of hearing directly from the community. Since comments are currently received online, board directors are able to read all of them, even those not read aloud. Public comments do not necessarily receive a response from board directors, as many matters are operational and in the purview of the district administration. Further, comments are not vetted or edited for accuracy, and even when presented as statements of fact. So comments reflect the interpretation and the opinion of the commenters. So Ms. Patterson, if you could please proceed. We are going to use our 10 minutes. Rather than just giving 1 minute to a series of comments, we received many comments, and some were very long, and some were from groups. We will hear about 1 minute from individual comments, and then several comments that were from groups. Specifically, groups of educators will be read for longer than that, from 3 to 4 minutes. That way we can get a fuller picture into the record of a balanced set of views, and then all of the comments will be available so for the public who wants to read them. But again, all directors have seen all of these comments and have been able to read them in full. Ms. Patterson.
Dear BSD board members, thank you for the recent update on back to school plans. However, we are failing our children on a daily basis, and more needs to be done urgently to give all students the option of returning to in-person school. By the very conservative phasing that was released in December, BSD should be in phase 4, and yet we are still stuck in phase 1 with very slow steps outlined over the next month to move forward to phase 2. This is inexcusable. 2 more high schoolers in our state committed suicide this week, one of them in neighboring Kirkland. How many more will it take before urgent action is taken to serve our students? The mental health pandemic is raging and has already proven far more dangerous for students than COVID-19. It continues to worsen with each passing day. While it is great that our district has committed to bringing our youngest learners back to the building in the next few weeks, all students need to be back ASAP. Current guidelines from the state of Washington allows for all kids K through 12 to be in school in at least a hybrid mode right now. Other districts, this was from Don Clark. The next one is on behalf of BSD, LAP, and MLL facilitators. 2 building administrators, district leaders, and board of directors. As multilingual learners, MLL facilitators, and learning assistance program, LAP facilitators of elementary buildings, we are writing as a collective team to advocate for students who are receiving MLL and or LAP services, to acknowledge and share the work educators have contributed during the current global pandemic and heightened incidents of racial injustices. We are requesting a response for how we can collaborate at a district level to meet the needs of our students, families, and teachers in a safe manner. As MLL and LAP facilitators, we know our role, we know our students, we know our schools, and we know our individual risk factors. See Addendum A and D. As stakeholders, we want to be part of the decisions that are being made alongside MLL Department Director Chitra Barwaj, elementary MLL facilitators work K5 with caseloads ranging from 72 to 123 MLL students. See Addendum Table B. Elementary LAP facilitators work with K5 below grade level students, supporting their growth to reach grade level expectations. In service of our most vulnerable students in the Bellevue School District jointly, we propose the following considerations. Priority 1 recommendation is to continue our work in a responsive and flexible manner. Bullet point 1, allowing the highest number of students to receive the maximum amount of support. Bullet point 2, making decisions in partnership with administration to facilitators' role and responsibilities to virtual or in-person placement per building need. Bullet point 3, preserving collegiality with classroom teachers so that they can thrive in the co-teaching cycle safely and virtually. Bullet point 4, honoring virtual placements for high-risk category colleagues who have personal or immediate family members whose health precludes them from participating in hybrid setting. Priority 2 recommendation is to stay safe by following the CDC/LNI guidelines. Bullet point 1, matching the contacts of the K2 classrooms to a maximum of 16. Bullet point 2, allowing a safe space to work, keeping 6 feet distance for sustained instruction. Bullet point 3, providing proper PPE, including but not limited to fitted N95 mask. Bullet point 4, having. The next one is from Teresa Forsberg. Dear BSD board members, I am writing to advocate for the return of face-to-face learning for our students. Our children have been out of school for almost 140 days. It is clearer to me now more than ever before the power a teacher beholds, the ability to inspire passion in a subject, engage reluctant learners, and form positive relationships. This cannot be done through a computer screen. It is done in the classroom, in the hallway, in the library, the counseling office, and on the field. Education is built on relationships, and in the absence of these relationships, our children are suffering. Depression rates, suicide attempts, eating disorders are escalating among our youth the longer the isolation goes on. All across the nation, school districts have successful models of face-to-face learning. Are you looking at these districts? What mitigation strategies do they have in place to reduce risk while maintaining the continuity of instruction? What best practices are emerging to keep staff and children safe while maintaining our mission to public education? This one is on behalf of, it's Elisa Souza. To whom it may concern, I am a parent of 3 children who attend BSD. I have a high schooler, a middle schooler, and a first grade student. I am writing to share with you my thoughts and concern about the recent plan to begin in-person services starting later this month. I am sharing with you from the perspective of a single working parent who does not have significant resources. I believe I speak for others in our community who are in a similar position. The online schooling situation has put much stress on our family. It is not ideal in any way. My older boys are struggling and, quite frankly, failing many of their classes. My youngest child has an IEP and receives support services at school, including special ed and therapies. Online schooling has not worked well for all 3. It has had a negative impact on their development, their mental health, and their attitude regarding education and their futures. I am in a position to not only want, but to need. This is on behalf of Allison Combe, who's writing for Medina teachers. Dear members of the school board and of the Bellevue School District Board and Superintendent Duran, we are writing to you as a group of educators from Medina Elementary who are sincerely concerned about the current plan to return to the buildings for K2 hybrid classes and many special education students throughout the district. We have a responsibility to advocate for our students and for what is best for them. We are writing to advocate a delay to return to in-person instruction until staff can be vaccinated. Unless and until it is available and in use in our community, we cannot advocate for a return to in-person instruction. Returning prior to vaccination is harmful to all members of our community. As educators, we are proud of what BSD and our staff have put into place since the change to in-person learning in March. We applaud the district for providing devices along with countless hours of support for the use of those devices, internet, meals, and childcare. The changes in our work environment have required flexibility and innovation like we have never experienced before. We are working extra hours planning and adjusting materials to make them suitable for virtual learning, as well as learning new technology and teaching strategies. As educators, we see the successes and hardships of our students and families every day. While we do see many students joyfully learning, we also see arguments, tension, and stresses in the homes of our students. As professionals and experts in our classes, we are the most able and qualified to advocate for the needs of our students. While we are proud of the many accomplishments of our districts over the last 10 months, we also have serious concerns with the current plans to return to in-person learning. We appreciate the time you take to read and consider our concerns and look forward to thoughtful and concise written response to address the concerns brought up in our letter and by other members of our community. Concerns, bullet point 1. We are very concerned with how we are being asked to teach in person. It is significantly different than how we typically teach. Many developmental and best practices that are required for successful instruction are not possible due to LNI safety requirements. Some of these practices include guided reading instruction at targeted instructional levels, age-appropriate physical breaks with a large movement, equity of access to visual aids and collaboration between small groups of students. Currently, each of these practices are being implemented in our remote learning model. Teaching a small class is not the same as teaching a small group. Bullet point 2. School is typically a warm and inviting environment. You often see high fives, fist bumps, hugs, and students gathered supporting one another. The school environment that students will experience in 2 short weeks will be sterile in comparison to what students are used to. Students who are experiencing sadness, separation, anxiety, especially K students, or other strong feelings will not be able to be comforted by an adult other than words from 6 feet away. Due to masks, they won't even receive a smile or empathetic expression. Who is preparing students for the differences in what they expect schools to be like and what the actuality is? What are the social and emotional repercussions of bringing students back to the highly restricted environment?
Time.
Okay.
That's it for comments.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So our volunteer board of directors very much appreciates the time and effort put into public comments and the correspondence to us. And again, while we do not generally respond, we do read what people send us. It has numbered in the hundreds of comments and multiple pages in some comments. And we do take that information into account in our oversight role in the district and when making policy. So we do want to emphasize, although you may not receive a personal response, it is read, it is consumed, it is considered. All public comments submitted online and in compliance with stated requirements, whether or not they are read aloud during the meeting, will be included as part of the official record for the next regular board meeting following receipt of the comments. That now brings us to our break. We are behind time, board of directors. Let's reconvene at 6:45. Okay, as we reassemble, Dr. Duran, do you have everything keyed up for the next section?
Yes, Deputy Collins will be getting us started on that next section.
Okay, are there any materials? Like, do I need to refresh? Do we need to refresh board docs? Because I don't have anything showing.
The only thing I sent in is that chart, Yasmina or Mike, that I sent to you regarding the enrollment of, it was like a screenshot of an Excel.
Okay, maybe
Would you
we'll
like that to be displayed now, Eva?
Sure. I think so. Dr. Reese, should we?
Yes. Why don't we display it, and then if you can post it, if someone can post it as well, that would be great, so we can open it up.
Yeah, because it looks like it's going to be really hard to see.
You won't be able to see it that well.
Yeah, I can tell.
I can zoom in on a part and then you can tell me to slide left or right when you need. That way it's legible.
Okay.
It's still really small with the way the screen is.
Yeah.
Right. So I think what Mr. Bartz is doing is fine. Can someone send it to us via email and then make sure it gets posted?
Yasmina, can you forward that email?
I'll forward it. I got that.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Great, thanks. Okay, but why don't you go ahead, since we're so low on time? I think we have almost everyone back. We definitely have quorum.
Okay. So as you know that over the break prior to the break, we had sent out a survey asking parents if they wanted to change their enrollment and shift from hybrid to virtual or from virtual to hybrid when we announced that students would be coming back kindergarten through second grade beginning at the end of January. And so this chart just gives you some data to share how many parents requested a change and demographically where those students are demographically. So there are a total of 3,841 students enrolled in kindergarten through second grade currently in the Bellevue School District, and we had 400 requests for a change out of the 3,841. So 400 requests to change. You can see that 296 of those were a change to go from hybrid to virtual, and 104 were requests to go from virtual to hybrid. And we were able to fulfill all of those requests. We weren't sure if we would be able to, but we were able to. Now, in doing that, many had to change teachers, some have to change schools as a result of doing that, but they were all fulfilled. Then you can see where that is demographically. And so the way that we're showing you this data is, if you look down the first demographic of our Asian students, you'll see that Asian students represent 48% of kindergarten through second graders. And they represent 54% of the requests to move from hybrid to virtual. And they represent 59% of the requests to move from virtual to hybrid. They represent 55% of all of the total 400. And then you can see the total enrollment in hybrid now for kindergarten through second grade will be 2,549. So if you look at that chart, then that represents 39% of that group is represented by our Asian students. And of the kids enrolled in virtual, 66% are represented by our Asian students. And then finally, if you're wondering, well, I wonder though, of our subgroup of Asian students, what percentage are in hybrid now then, or will be when we return, and what percentage will be in virtual? It's 53% and 47%. You can see for all of the other demographics that it's much more, other than advanced learning, that we have far more enrolled in hybrid than virtual. So our Asian and our advanced learning demographics were closer to the 50-50 than any other subgroup. So hopefully you received that now so you can actually read it, because I know it's hard to read on the screen.
As we're looking at that, does anyone have questions?
Yeah, sorry, just one quick one that I realized I never actually hit enter that. So when you say change schools, you mean change to a teacher who is not a teacher at their school. They are still enrolled at their current school, but they're in a class. I mean, because we already had that, right? Like,
yes, that's exactly
right. And Anatai are with the teacher who's at Medina, right? Like that's just how it's been since the beginning.
Exactly.
So I just want to clarify that. Like they don't have to change schools. They're still enrolled at their school, but they have a teacher at a different school. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Dr. Chu?
Sorry, I wanted to ask if what you've observed is consistent across the grade level bands or not, or is this all just K2?
This is all K2, yes.
Okay, so we don't have info on other grade levels. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
To follow up on that, when do we expect to survey the remainder of the students? We're coming up on the end of second semester. We did let families know that they would have the option to switch at the semester mark.
I will call on Heather Edlund, who is leading up the committee on not only preparing for our K2, but for our K5 return, Heather Sanchez and Heather Edlund. And I don't know that that date has been set for the next survey. Has it, Heather?
So we're meeting with an implementation team on Thursday. And we have a proposed timeline that we're going over with them, backwards mapping. And so I can share that with you, following that meeting on Thursday.
Sure.
I would say, since right now we don't have a date for changing to an in-person setting, everyone is remaining remote. So, but yes, we do have that timeline and we can share that soon once we've gone through our full implementation committee process.
So can I just chime in that I think even if it seems that at this point that it's not changing for those students right now, that it does make a difference because they may be anticipating the changes that are coming up and would rather make that switch at the semester mark rather than at a different time after the semester has begun. And then further, for some students currently, unless the district is also planning on changing this, that there are some courses that students are not permitted to take when they are in virtual. They were designated as courses that you could only take when you were in hybrid learning, and yet the students who were in the hybrid program did them completely virtual all semester. And so there are students who may want to either be designated as hybrid so they have access to those courses, or is the district going to change it so that students do have those access to those courses even if they remain in the virtual program?
Can you please give me an example of a course just to help me understand which courses?
Video production. So there are many electives that were designated as available only to students in the hybrid model.
I don't have an answer to that question. Regarding the plan for kids to change courses at the semester, we had not planned on having kids change courses at semester necessarily. The hybrid and the virtual option was one that we had said to parents we would give for second semester, but we had not planned on that. But that is a good question, given that there's a difference in what kids can sign up for. So thank you.
So in other words, those are electives that the student may have signed up for, but then we're not allowed, quote, allowed to have them because of the model that they're in. And so they may be wanting to change models for that, or perhaps they're is going to be a change on the district level, and so I'm sure the guidance counselors would want to know that at this time as well, our counselors, and but in general, because the semester mark is coming up, it would seem that having the opportunity for families to chime in now would be timely and important.
Okay. Can I just add a different perspective to that? I just want to add the perspective of, if we go through that whole process and people make those changes and things, and then we don't ever come back in person, because I just don't know what that will look like, then we have put kids in with like brand new instructors. Say they were in calculus for the full year. Now we've changed their calculus teacher midway. We've changed their physics teacher midway. So we've now done all these changes for kids that maybe didn't need to make all those changes, and it wouldn't have made any difference for them. But do you see what I'm saying? So I think we need to like really think about how we want to go about that, because I don't think it's that simple.
I understand, and I would say that I realize it's an operational issue. However, collecting that data now so we're ready with it then allows, implementation of the plans, and it's a commitment that was made to families, and it seems that just getting that step of collecting that information is important, and it also gives us a scope of really just like this data with K2 to indicate how many people really feel that their student is not in the receiving the modality that works well for them. So when we talk about each and every student, people may not have predicted how their student would fare in the modality that they're in, and now have a much better sense of that.
I think it's really important that we couch it appropriately, because I don't look. Our goal is to get kids back in schools, and we've had this conversation. However, I don't want us to. I don't want it to be misinterpreted that we're going back to school right away if we collect that data. That's the other piece of it. So we just need to make sure we communicate very clearly with that.
Dr. Serafan, Director Serafan.
Thank you. This is actually a question probably to Executive Director or Deputy Superintendent DeVita, but it might also be for Deputy Superintendent Collins, which is, what is the optimal time to take the survey based on when students would go back? Because I hear both what Dr. Wiesta saying and what Ms. DeVita is saying in terms of sort of, you could get visibility to how things are going, and in the optimal scenario will help you potentially make a decision that also opens up more optionality for classes. At the same time, we did see what happened when we surveyed, and then the situation changed on the ground pretty significantly. And then people said, well, when you surveyed me, I had one view, but where we are now I have a very different view. So I guess I'm just asking, what do you think is the lead time that would be the minimum, maximum from an operational standpoint?
Well, so I understand Dr. Wiesta's point, because changing at semester is a lot easier than changing mid-semester. So that's one piece we take into consideration on the one hand. On the other hand, we take into consideration us not having a lot of information about when we would actually be in person. And so then are people making changes and having these kind of upheavals in their kids' education that were unnecessary because we didn't get back in buildings, right? So it's kind of a catch-22 there, and I appreciate the question of optimum. I don't know that there is an optimum time. I think we just need to be very careful on what we communicate in terms of, if we're doing the survey now, know that we may not be back in person until fourth quarter, and even then it may not be, because we just don't know that timeline at this point, right? Because the high schoolers are the one group of kids that are pretty far down that Department of Health decision tree.
Okay, well, here's a different way, if I may, just to ask the question. What's the minimum time you need to take a survey, obtain the results, and then provide enough analysis, and then the operational connecting of dots to action the requests that you've received? What is that?
3 to 4 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks. By the time you do all the shuffling and make sure that there is room in the classes and look at, do we have to add teachers to specific areas if we are going to be able to meet the requests of all parents, which is our goal. And we did do that in K-2.
Mm-hmm.
It would have taken less time if we said, space limited, sorry, you're not getting switched, but we didn't do that. We really worked hard to get people where they wanted to be.
Okay, so it sounds like lead time of about 4 weeks is what's needed if you want to be able to action the requests, depending, I guess, on how many requests you get. But I see Dr. Chu's question.
And it's more complex at secondary than it is at elementary.
That's what I was going to say. For elementary, we're talking about one teacher. And so one class, one teacher, one class size. Coming back in person, we have a class lid because of the 6-foot distancing. And so it was a lot less complicated than I think it will be at secondary. So 3 or 4 weeks may be tight. We'd want to back that up further just to give the parents time also to respond. Dr. Chu?
All right, I may be changing topics here. So I've got, and so if you want to table my question, it's fine. I am curious in terms of the secondary courses about some of the courses like ceramics and glass blowing and all those things. We probably had hoped that we could start second semester in those studios, and that's not looking so promising right now. So I would be interested in understanding how we are looking at second semester electives for all secondary, for the specialized things that require on-site presence. But the other question that I have is, I really wanted to understand, as you were showing us the enrollment requests and so forth for the K2 folks, I wanted to just get a clear understanding. I tried to add up in the chart that you presented about the number of in-person services we're providing right now for students. And I tried to do it in my head on the fly, and I'm not awesome at computation in that way. So I think we're in the 800 to 1,000 students range if I don't account for the outdoor athletics work, but about 800 to 1,000 in building. First, is that correct?
That is correct. However, we have to recognize that not every student that was invited to come in person actually came. And so then yes, the school can then go to the next, another student and invite another student. But the invitation to return in person doesn't exactly match the actual number of kids who showed up. So it's probably slightly less than what we have on our chart.
So we don't update the chart based on actuals, even though those are past dates?
No, because then the school can go to the next student and say, well, because they have room and they have staffing and they've set up for a certain number of students. And then they're going to give kids an opportunity and try to respond, try to get them in. And if they can't, or if the student says, I'm not coming, or the parents say, my child's not coming, then they can go to the next student. So it's kind of fluid.
Okay, so what I wanted to go with this, thank you for clarifying that. That's actually really helpful to understand the data better. What I really wanted to understand is how many kids do we have on site right now, and how is that going in terms of our ability to mitigate? How many different buildings are open? Do we know how many classrooms are open? And as far as, you've presented the number of kids who are interested in hybrid at this time, I want to make sure, do we have all risk mitigations in place, and how many buildings is that going to be open at, and what do people do if they're worried that a risk mitigation isn't actually in place or isn't functioning the way it's supposed to? What's the process we have? What's everything kind of there? Yeah, can you kind of walk through that for me?
Yeah, I can. I'm gonna talk about what we have in place for when people come back first, and then I'll go back to what we're doing right now, okay, and how that's working. So basically, all of the risk mitigations that we outlined over the summer, they have been updated some, depending upon when new things come out from the Department of Health, but they're all available on the website, and you can go and see the list of them. Each principal has a principal notebook that says basically what needs to be in place. We also have building checklists, principal checklists to make sure, and they've got timelines. Like you need to have these people identified that will have these roles. For example, the somebody who is in charge of the isolation room in case somebody comes to school and has a fever. And so we've got the roles all identified in training for them. And then we also have the checklist of what needs to be in the building. You know, the signs, the isolation rooms identified. We have the checkpoints where kids are coming into school. We've got this entire list that there should not be any soft things in the classrooms like sofas and those types of things. There's an entire checklist that everybody's going through. We're going to take a cross-functional team through every school that has the principal, somebody from facilities, somebody from nursing, a BEA representative to go through and make sure that everything that was said to be in place will absolutely be in place. So that's the first thing, to make sure that the facilities are entirely ready to go.
Melissa, as you keep going through this, can you also make clear where individual staff members, like a teacher or a para, will be able to do their own checklisting and access the supplies that they need and how they'll get those things? Thank you.
Yeah. So
could you also address something we talked about offline, which may feed directly after Dr. Chu's question. I'd asked you about, I think in response to some questions I had seen that came in from teachers. A given teacher goes to school or staff member or anyone else, including, you know, the custodian or the person who's a food service worker, and they go and they see that something's missing, or the wipes or whatever was promised is not there. We had talked about a way to escalate that very quickly. Could you describe that? Thank you.
Yep, I will. So so that's the first thing, though, that there is a checklist. People are going to walk through the building in this cross-functional group, take pictures so that all the different groups are represented to see exactly what is in place before the building even opens. So that is the first piece. The second piece is then the equipment and what we are providing to all of our different staff members and what we have on staff available and that type of thing. So sorry, I'm getting the list up because there's a lot. Let's see. So with respect to masks, we are following the labor and industry guidelines, and so the type of mask a person gets is specific to their role. But every staff, every all general education teachers and general school assistants will get 5 cloth masks, 10 multi-purpose disposable masks, and those are medical grade. Every masks that we are ordering have been FDA approved, so we're not getting the cheap masks that may be coming from counterfeit sources or those types of things. And everyone will also get a face shield. So those are being delivered to every single teacher. In addition, schools are receiving extra masks and extra face shields that fit both adults and children. And those are already on their campuses, and they have multiple boxes of those. We're also providing N95 respirators and masks to staff members who are in positions where they work very closely with students. And we have 4 different types, and we're getting those directly from the manufacturers, and those are stocked in our warehouse. And the reason why we have 4 different types is because different people's faces fit better into one type or another. And those do have to be fitted on the individual. With respect to disposable gloves, those are more scarce. We have 4 different sizes currently in the warehouse, and they are being restocked on a regular basis from our vendors. We are prioritizing staff members that are in contact with student bodily fluids for those gloves. So it's not every classroom teacher. So it's in specific programs like PALS, preschool, and those types of things. Seema, you have a question?
Yes, you went through the different types of masks, and for that in particular, can you ground me, because I think you did it once before for me in a conversation. How is what we are doing for teachers different from or the same as, in terms of mask supply, as what we've been doing so far? That is, I understand that to date, I know we've had everything from staff, administrators, custodians, teachers, special ed teachers, we've had aides, we have paras, they have been on site. So if we compare that to what you've just described in terms of various types of masks, if somebody's comparing what are we going to do going forward versus what protocols we've had in place to date that we understand have worked so that there have been no on-site transmissions, help us understand or explain, please, benefit of others, what you've told me. Thank you.
Yeah, so so we've done a lot of the same things today, but we're delivering, every teacher will have their own set in their classroom. So, you know, it's not in a common area, and that's a little bit different than what we did before, because we would just have like stocks at our buildings, but this way we're making sure that everybody has exactly what they need at their disposal, and making sure that every single individual person has a face shield so that they're more comfortable wearing that or wearing that in combination with a mask. It's right there available for them to do that. And having the extra face shields for students is really important, because if a student isn't comfortable wearing a mask, then we do have the face shield to further support that student. So there's a lot of things there from that perspective.
Wouldn't we want, though, all students to wear at least a mask, because a shield on its own?
Right. They will have both. They can have both, though. And so if a student is one that plays with it or something, then as we're working with it, they can still have a shield as well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I want to chime in for a moment. Just I want to make sure, was there anything else the district wanted to present aside from the Excel spreadsheet? So we are over our time. We do not need very much time for the executive session, so we have a few more minutes, but we do want to try to wrap this up within the next 5 minutes. So is there anything else the district wanted to present?
We have nothing else that we were planning on presenting.
Okay, then let's just then continue with any questions, comments, concerns from directors. Does anyone else have something they want to raise?
Can I just say one other thing? We do have a thing on our staff portal, the question about how can people provide feedback. They can always go to somebody in their building, like their administrator or others who should know what supplies they have, same with their office manager. But we've also got on our staff portal a place where they can go in and complete a form that says, I'm at this school, I don't see these things here, or I'm short on this, or whatever. And that's being routed to Connie Soga, who works in our warehouse, who will go through those and get them to the right people and make sure that staff have what they need, or if there's a concern of procedurally, we'll get it to the right person to work with them on that. So staff do have an opportunity to provide feedback directly to us.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions? I did think we covered a lot earlier in the meeting as well. Yes, Dr. Chu.
I just wanted to clarify something that Deputy Director DeVita brought up that I'm not entirely clear on. Did you say that there are walkthroughs being done at each location, each building, that include staff from all different staffing groups, including our educators, teachers, counselors, every group of folks?
No, there's so it will be a cross-functional group. So it will be the building administration. There will be somebody from like the nursing staff, the medical group. There will be a BEA representative as part of that group. There will be somebody from facilities as part of that group, so that as they go through, they'll make sure that everything is good with the checklist. And then if not, the person who's responsible for it will be right there. And then the BEA rep will be there as well to make sure that our risk mitigation things are in place as we stated they would be.
And is there any time for teachers to acclimate to the protocols or anything? I know that we did a training in October for them. Will their rooms be open a couple days before? It just what are we doing to make sure teachers can get ready and know how to use and access?
So they do get 2 days to prepare to come back into the buildings, and there is additional training that they will be provided to walk through all the processes and procedures. So all of that is happening as well as we get ready to come back.
Director Watson.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to ask, now that N95s are more available and they're not really in as much shortage as they were before, is there any plan to eventually provide an option for an N95 to any teacher that wants one? Because they'd probably feel safer. I know they're harder to wear, but I would love it if they could have that option.
So I'm happy to look into that, but the biggest thing I think with the N95s is getting the fittings done.
Yes.
And so I just want to make sure we work with an outside source to do the majority of fittings. We are looking at getting somebody in-house trained to do the fittings that they think are right but aren't. And some people get fitted and they're supposed to be airtight, and then when they check them, they're not. And so then they have to go back again. And we want to have somebody in-house to help deal with some of those, so that we're not sending people back and back and back multiple times. So, so it's the fitting thing that we need to make sure that we work through.
Okay, but do you think it'll be possible? Because, you know,
as time goes on, probably, but I know that the fitting people are backlogged right now. I just don't know enough about it to say it's open or it's not or whatever. So I'm happy to follow up on it and see kind of what that looks like.
I'm just worried with this new
questions?
variant, you know, it might be more transmissible.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, we did cover a lot, and we definitely, I'll say I appreciate getting the updates so we can continue in our oversight role. The district's continuing to bring back students. It sounds like hopefully we'll get an update on what the plan is for kind of the next tranche of students. Clearly want to be very successful in bringing back the K through 2 students, and yet it sounds like from the timing of getting additional students in, the planning needs to start now in order for that timing to be smooth and ongoing. And then also I think to some points that were raised earlier, that we're continuing to bring in students who are really in need in the small groups throughout all of the different schools and in different subjects. It's heartening to see that the CTE, some of our multi-period CTE kind of naturally cohorted courses are finally coming in. So many successes in terms of the efforts that the district has, and kind of being a real leader in our area, and certainly for a district of this size. But continuing to push ahead on that work. It is juggling a lot of balls, but really in the interest of students, we are hearing and seeing how much many students need to have additional supports during this time for their social emotional well-being, which is our goal 1. Any other closing thoughts on this? Otherwise, we'll just move into the next item on the agenda. Okay, Dr. Chu.
I can do this during liaison updates. Is that helpful? I have a WIAA athletics question comment.
Yes, that would be great. So we'll close out item 10. For item 11 for agenda planning, I have a note about 3207, bringing that up in the next meeting or two. The agenda planning is, it's very rough. We will be working on that, especially with, the changes in reports and how we're doing these updates. But if you see something, or I guess more importantly, if you see something that's missing that you feel is in the time frame for the next couple of meetings that needs to be addressed, please let me know. So there's that. And then in terms of director updates, let's do only things that are really urgent, pertinent announcements. And then other than that, I'm going to ask kind of ongoing that director updates are provided written that can be put in here. And then if you have something that's urgent that directors need to know during the meeting, then we'll do that. So if there's anything that you have that was for today that can wait, put it in writing for the next meeting. But I think the WIA is evolving. So Dr. Chu, why don't you fill us in on that?
Okay, I don't have a ton of updates, but the short term is, as in my role as just a liaison to WIA, not to WIA, but to WASDA's WIA work or whatever. There's an update that the sports seasons are still sort of in limbo. So I believe that currently we're allowed to continue our individualized sports work through the end of this month, the fitness training and that sort of thing, and that potentially the season 1, which is our fall sports, would be starting on February 1st and would run through mid-March. And that season 2 and spring sports are still kind of up in the air, TBD. And we'll be getting some updates. There was also a KINCO meeting last night, and I don't have an update on that, but I know that that the KINCO League, which is not the whole state, it's just our region of the schools that play together in King County. They are also looking into making potentially separate decisions to have some sort of sports seasons or sports activities to really look at the social emotional health of our kids, because that's consistent with research that was done in our state this year about how meaningful those opportunities have been to the health of our kids. So hopefully we'll get an update. I know that our district athletic director sent something out last week about the WIA updates, and I expect we'll get something more. Dr. Duran, is that true? Probably an update from him when he knows more about the KINCO, the implications of that.
Yes, that's accurate. If we get it, we'll include in the board update this week.
Yeah, and for our community too, I assume, because he sent out that nice update to families last week, I believe.
Great. Are there any other updates from any other directors? Yes, Dr. Malif.
Yeah, I just want to give you guys, in my kind of unique perspective as a parent of a KN1 family or child, sort of my perspective on the back to school planning. And I just want to say there has been so much work put in by our building administrators and our teachers, and it's just incredible. I mean, the amount of information and like logistics that they all had to juggle. And, you know, we got this map of like, kids will go in this door and this door. If your child is in this classroom, you're over here. Then you don't walk past any other classrooms, you know, like just like amazing on that level. And I also want to say, I think you guys know, as far as the, you know, the procedures for, you know, safety and keeping cohorts safe. I think you guys know that my children have been at the Boys and Girls Club, and there was a case of COVID in my daughter's class, and this child was in the building for the week, and on Thursday was sent home with symptoms, and on Friday tested positive. And my daughter, who was in the room with him the entire time, tested negative. I was able to get her a test very easily through King County at Bellevue College. And then I followed up with Tim Motz, who is the CEO at the Boys and Girls Club, and asked, did you have any spread? These are pretty similar protocols to what the school district is doing. I just want to know. He said there had been no, you know, they did contact tracing for everybody. Everyone got tested. Nobody else contracted it. And this was a child who had been in the building, presumably with COVID for 4 days. So I just want to put that out there that, you know, the masking and the distance and the hand washing, and it all has to be done, but it's working in the Boys and Girls Club. It's working in our schools right now. And I'm really proud of all of the work that has gone into getting kids back in school. So thank you so much to everyone who's been doing this, community partners and everyone at our schools.
Thank you. So yes, the risk mitigation strategies, when they're all layered together, have been shown to be highly effective. And overall, hearing about really the resilience and the role modeling of all of our educators and administrators as we talk about the impact of COVID and having those role models and showing that resilience as for our students to model that way and rise to these challenges and make the things happen is really great to see. So I'm going to close things out for the regular meeting unless someone has something they really need to say. All right, 2 people, but we have to finish this part. So we have our executive session. All right, Director Serafin, Dr. Chu, 10 seconds each.
For PTSA, most of what I wanted to say was covered. I just want folks to know that the PTSA really did a fantastic job of essentially creating another layer of surveying our community, and it was quite valuable. And other than that, I just also want them to know, folks to know, that there's also an ask to engage volunteers in our community. And I think PTSA has put their finger on it as a need, so have others, and I think the district is working on it. That's all I want to say.
Okay, and Dr. Chu?
Yeah, I wanted to let you know that Eastside Pathways has a work group that is working on putting out Spanish language videos for folks to navigate the return to school process and all the processes. So because I know people do listen and use the board meetings as ways to inform, I want our community to know that those are being developed and are a resource that I think will be very helpful to our community as we walk through things. And I want to thank Benjamin Roas from our staff, who's serving as a liaison to that group, and he's really working hard to make that resource available. And I also want to just call out that BSF is in the throes of figuring out more fundraising work so that they can support us during this time and support things like getting this stuff available equitably to all classrooms and all students. So really appreciate the partnerships out there. I also want to say that as we move forward, just thank you to all the folks. I know sometimes it feels empty when folks are thanking and still asking for changes. We know this is a hard time. We know that staff, families, students are putting their heart and souls into making this work, and our community partners as well. We appreciate all that you are doing. I appreciate all that you are doing, and I know when we also ask to keep working and keep changing with us that it is hard, and I appreciate that too, and I genuinely just want to say thank you to everyone who's working so hard.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. I thank everyone. We have a number, over a dozen staff who have stuck with us here throughout and who provide support for the administration and for really leading the district here. So thank you to everyone for staying here. We are going to adjourn to an executive session. We are grateful for those who've been listening or who may listen later. Really seeing that our whole district is rising to the challenge, taking in this new data that's coming and adapting and role modeling that for our kids and being ready to serve each and every student. So those who need in-person learning are going to be able to do that. We are going to adjourn to an executive session. This meeting will continue. Our executive session is extremely short. It'll be 5 minutes. There'll be no more business that will occur after that executive session. So I will come back and adjourn the entire meeting at that time, but we will be, board director is already virtually go into the other room, and thank you everyone. So
Dr.
not
Weiss,
quite adjourned yet, but we'll be in 5 minutes. Yes. Oh, the purpose of this executive session is to evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment or to review the performance of a staff member. However, discussion of salaries, wages, and other conditions of employment to be generally applied within the district will occur in a meeting open to the public, and when the board elects to take the final action of hiring, setting the salary of an individual staff member or class of staff members, or discharging or disciplining an employee, that action will be taken in a meeting open to the public. All right, thank you, everyone. So this concludes our general meeting of the Board of Directors. The meeting is now adjourned.